Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Radnor Township School District Curriculum Committee meeting for June. It is June 18th. First item on the agenda, introductions and administrative remarks. Dr. McQuiggan.
Thank you very much. On our agenda tonight, we're going to finish up with our wellness presentation from last month, and then we also have two different teams that are coming in to present their audit findings. We'll have our K-12 librarians, and we will also be having our K-12 EL teachers. They're going to wait upstairs in the conference room until we're ready for them because we have an extended meeting today. And then I just wanted to mention that today was our last teacher day, so teachers across the district participated in technology activities. They worked on Schoology and had some Schoology trainings, and we also had some folks from Microsoft come in and work with our high school teachers with their new Surface Pros, and everyone else was able to work on Windows 10 and Microsoft in general. So everyone was very engaged, and it was a good way to kind of get us motivated for the last day and think about things for next year. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So I should probably note that we have two committee members, Andrew Babson, Dr. Babson, and Sarah Dunn, are participating via conference call. My vice chair, Mr. Madden, I believe is on his way. So we have three members of the committee in attendance, although two are.
I'm the vice chair.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, thanks, Andrew. I had that wrong. My vice chair is on the phone. We have three members of the committee, so we're going to be able to proceed with this meeting. And I should also note that this is Dr. McQuiggan's last committee meeting, curriculum committee meeting, as she is retiring. And I think I've said this at the business meeting last time, but she has made such a tremendous contribution to our district. I'm going to personally miss her. She's brilliant with curriculum, and the students in this district really have benefited greatly from that. And I think a lot of people don't know, because a lot of it is work that happens behind the scenes. So anyway, thank you to you again. And let's move on then. That brings us to public comment. Is there any public comment at this time? Any email comments? No. Okay, seeing none, we'll move right into the approval of the minutes. Committee members participating electronically, do you have any comments about the meeting minutes for the last meeting?
No.
Okay, so I believe the minutes stand as written. All right, and that brings us to the agenda item, which is the business action items for the business meeting next week.
So we have a long list here to wrap up the year. So let's start out with our overnight student trip. So this is our typical trip to Camp Sandy Hill for Radnor Middle School students. So for the board agenda next week, we have both the overnight trip request, and we also have the contract. I did just circulate a second document. On your board docs document, you were able to see the total district contribution for the trip, which was $21,159. But I provided you with another document just now that has a little bit more detail in it. So you'll see on there that the total estimated cost of the trip is $69,959. The students pay $160 per person to participate, so they offset that fee by $48,800. So the cost to the district is the $21,159, and that's pretty much made up of the salary for the 30 teachers and the 2 nurses who participate. So that'll just give you a little more detail to think about when you're thinking about that agenda item.
All right, thank you.
All right. We actually have one more student club. So they'll be able to hit the ground running in the fall. This is a club related to produce. They're going to collect produce from various places that sell produce that is nearly expired or expired, and find whatever usefulness they can out of that, and work with different shelters and other places to make use of those things that might otherwise be discarded. All right, and then I'm going to skip textbook adoptions just for a minute, because Mr. Budabar is still interviewing over at the high school. He's working with Mr. Bechtold to complete some job interviews. So they will be arriving shortly, but he's going to be talking about some of the textbooks. So we do have the grants from the Radnor Education Foundation. They're going to be going forward. Let me make sure I got this right. Okay, so we have another author visit for Radnor Elementary School. That's typically done annually. They pick a different author. They have Marla Fraze this year. Ref is going to be contributing to Circus Week this time at Radnor Elementary School. Wayne has typically done a program on for school supplies, the cost of school supplies. You know, the list gets longer and longer, and, you know, particularly families with multiple children, some of it does become cost prohibitive. So Ref helps to offset the cost of that for some of our students. The Girls Lead is a club that they've sponsored. I think this will be the 3rd year in a row. It's a girl empowerment group. And then Radnor High School is going to be getting some money for the summer ESY program. And then we had a really nice presentation on the archive renovation. So we're going to be taking one of the rooms at the Radnor High School library, and it's going to be repurposed so that the students can archive materials about the Radnor Township School District, and that would be available for students and the public to view or use in any way that they might be interested in. So that's a really neat project that REF is going to sponsor a portion of. And then the word empowerment mural, those are, you might have seen them in some schools where you have motivational statements that might be on like the restroom doors or in the hallways or things like that. So that'll be a cooperative project with students and teachers across our elementary schools. And REF will be helping out with that. All right, any questions about any of those items?
So this is more just procedural, but I know that you've been very closely involved with REF in the grants that they're participating in year after year. And I know with you stepping out of the district, is someone aware of, you know, who's going to transition in from the district to make sure that
So the way we divvy
all
the
that's
grants up
coordinated?
is I do the secondary grants and Dr. Abarchik has always done
Okay.
the elementary grants. So we will continue to divide it up the same way because when they come in, we actually circulate them around, you know, cabinet and whoever else might need to see them before a teacher or whomever is asking goes through the longer process of filling out a complete grant application. Just so we can think about other cost implications or competing programs or things like that. So we anticipate it will be split up the same way, elementary and secondary.
Okay.
Maureen, can I ask a quick question on Sandy Hill?
Yes.
I know that the cost of that is not insignificant for families. Can you just remind me and make sure the public hears that if it is a burden to families whose children are expected to go on the program, we actually do have funding to
Yes.
help them?
Yes, we do. So they have their choice, whichever they're most comfortable with. They can go through their guidance counselor or they can go through their school principal, and they will speak with them about possible funding supports.
Okay, and we make that known in the packages we send home about Sandy Hill, right?
Yes, and I do believe we also reach out to some individual families that we're aware of ahead of time.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so if we're ready to move on to the textbook adoption, I'll turn it over to Mr. Kearney, and he can start with his textbooks, and then when Mr. Budabar gets here, we'll talk about world language.
So many textbooks. Yeah, that'll work. So we have several social studies textbooks to bring forward for adoption this month. Last year, we went through the social studies curriculum audit, and as part of that, we took a look at the status of our textbooks from K through 12, as specifically looking at the copyright dates when we adopted those, as well as how long the online access would last before it expired. And as a result of this, and as a result of how we had adopted books previously, we're going to be phasing in the new adoptions over the next 3 years, starting with this year. So this year, we're taking a look at books for 6th, 10th, and 11th grade, as well as one of our electives. In 6th grade, the teachers reviewed a number of books, but they had been happy with the current book that they're using, the World Cultures and Geography from National Geographic. However, the online access is coming to an end at the beginning of next year, so we knew we were going to have to do something anyway. What we've decided to do is just to extend our online access to the new edition of the book, not adopt hard copies of the book themselves because the changes are relatively minor from what we're currently using, and the books we have are in good shape. Teachers primarily just use them in the classroom anyway, and if the students need access, generally speaking, they just use online access outside of the classroom. So we're going to we're proposing to extend the online access to this textbook. They would also like to supplement it with some of these readers that are on various topics concerning current global issues, called global issues. And one of the things that that appealed to the teachers about these when they were reviewing them and hearing about them is that it's the same topic addressed at 3 different reading levels, so that's going to help them differentiate for students who might be operating at different levels within their classrooms. All students might be, or students within a group might be reading about the same topic, but reading about it at different reading levels, and that's something that has appealed to them. So that's what we're proposing for 6th grade. In 10th grade, the teachers have gone quite a while without really using the textbook in the Global Studies course. So they had looked at, again, a number of different books this year, and the one that they're recommending is Geography, Human and Physical World, which they feel aligns well with the regional approach to the course that it takes. However, they were particularly interested in the historical background that this book provides and thought it would be a useful resource to help students kind of have a common jumping off point for a lot of the topics that they're addressing. This is very much a supplemental resource in this course. They still have a heavy emphasis on current issues and current events, and then taking a look at the historical perspective on those. But they did feel like it would be useful for students to have a common resource to work from. And similarly, the online component of this book can be adapted for different reading levels, which was something of appeal to the teachers, and they felt that that would be useful for them to be able to use it in college prep, advanced, and the honors levels of that course. The integrated global issues teachers would like to include this nonfiction text. It's not a textbook, called Prisoners of Geography, dealing with how a country or region's geographic location on the globe has an influence on their geopolitics and may help to explain some of the questions that they're dealing with and some of their role in the world in the present day. It aligns very nicely with the focus of this course, which is similar to the global studies, but as I think you're pretty well aware, has an English teacher and a social studies teacher co-teaching it and is addressing these topics at an even higher level. 11th grade teachers, some of them, the AP and the honors level teachers are happy with the textbooks that they're using, but for college prep and advanced, primarily Dave Wood and Rob King took a look at a number of textbooks and thought that this one was one that they would like to use, again, as a supplemental resource. It's called America, Narrative History, Volume 2, as a supplemental resource in that course to help dip into to get students some background information on what it is that they're teaching in that course. Again, they fully intend to supplement this with other resources, but they felt like it would be useful to have a text that they could work with all students, and that's something they don't think they really have adequately now. And then finally, Mr. Miller is recommending that we adopt this for AP Macroeconomics, called Economics here. The book that he's currently using is 10 years old and doesn't have online resources. So he has said he's been in correspondence with a number of AP teachers from around the country, as well as some of the workshops that he went to. This was a book that came up repeatedly. He feels it aligns well with his curriculum, and he feels like the absence of online resources and support materials, including practice questions and whatnot, is to detriment to his students at this point. So he's recommending that book there. This is a college level text for an AP course, and it is AP Macro and Micro. Unfortunately, we're not able to just buy the macro version of this with online access because that's not available to high schools. We did try to look into that. So those are the books that we are proposing for social studies. The teachers typically, as far as the process, will collect a variety of different resources, whittle through them for the ones that the top 1, 2, or 3 that really stand out to them, and then look at those in a lot more depth, including possibly bringing in some of the vendors to do presentations to us, and that's what we did with some of these titles here.
Okay, so committee members, we usually spend a lot more time on our textbook adoptions. We usually have the teachers come, or the teachers who are requesting them. So I'm just going to ask committee members, those that are in town, if you're able to just look over the textbooks. They'll be outside outside Mr. Batchelor's office, just because we have to kind of breeze through these much quicker than we typically would because we've got a pressing agenda. So, okay.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Sure.
How do we integrate our textbooks with the features that our library has?
I think it's more approached, how do we integrate the features that the library has with our instruction in the course? Yeah, so our teachers work pretty closely with the librarians, and I think maybe you'll hear about this as part of the presentation coming forward. But our teachers work pretty closely with the librarians. The librarians are well aware of the curriculum that's being taught. In at least some cases, the librarians are in classrooms working with students to help them find resources, in addition to having the students come to the library to find those resources as well. And I know that in the past, when we've made curricular changes, we've alerted the library, and they've supplemented the resources that they have available, the books that they have available to students there. But you've got the experts in the room, so they might be able to address that a little bit more directly.
Yeah, I would love to hear it. Thank you.
So every year when we do our renewals of our electronic resources, we kind of try to evaluate what the teachers are using. We look at our usage statistics and we try to stay abreast. I'm going to say we stay abreast of what the changes are in the curriculum, and if we see a gap, we discuss with the teachers what they might need, and so we try to adapt our orders for our online resources based on what the teachers tell us they need.
Great, thank you very much.
Ready for Ryan?
I had a quick question about the various reading levels that are available online. Is that something that the teachers set by student and say, this student's getting level A, this student's getting level C based on, and I guess my question is based on what?
Yeah. So the online components that do adjust the reading level can be set specifically by student. So the teachers can choose certain students for different reading levels. Some of that, depending on the data we have on the student, might be very specific based on an IEP or something along those lines. In other cases, it may just be a self-assessment of the student or the teacher for which level might be most appropriate for them, and adjusted throughout the year as need be.
Can she answer your question? She has this.
Hold on, Sarah. More coming.
Hi, Sue Dahlstrom, librarian again. All the databases that we have, there are 3 levels, easy, beginning, easy, middle, and high. So when I'm teaching, I'll say to 5th graders, you can go down, you can go up. So, and the other thing that a lot of the public might not know is maybe there are 40 different languages in our databases that the students can select if English isn't their first language or they're more comfortable reading. And it also reads aloud to them, so that's not in their native language, but in English. So that's another way that the library resources are supporting what's going on in the classrooms.
And the students themselves.
That's great, thank you.
Correct? Sorry. The students themselves, if they're reading a passage and they don't quite understand it, they could bump it down to the next level if that would be more understandable to them. And then maybe go back. I mean, it could be a tool that you could actually use.
And there's a feature with a lot of the textbooks on the online that it will actually read to students as well, or there's an option for students to highlight text and have it read to them. Okay. So there are choices, or you see this on iPads and Kindles too. You hover over a word and you can get a definition of the word. So there's a lot of supports, particularly with the online resources that aren't available in just the hard paper text. Okay, Mr.
That's really helpful to know.
And additionally, Noodletools is a popular piece with the middle school where students work on a research paper, and the Noodletools will help them organize and cite all the information and resources. So Dr. Kearney has the world language French and Spanish textbooks if there's any questions.
Ryan, do you just want to talk about which levels they go with? And
Certainly.
1, 2, and
So here's 1A and 1B.
T. Branchet. So that is for next year's high school course called 1-2. And so that would typically probably be 9th and 10th grade students. So there are students that may or may not have had middle school French. It's the same textbooks that we use in 7th and 8th grade. So they get through most of the series in 8th grade and they continue in a 1-2 course at the high school level. So it does add to that continuity and kind of streamlines the middle school experience with the high school. Also having that 1-2 combo course, the numbers are high enough you can run a section or two of it next year.
So how many of those are we purchasing? Do we have
So,
that information?
so it's a newer course next year, and like the question earlier, they typically have a class set of the books, and then they have another 40 online licenses. It's referencing here 20 for the classroom, and then 40 online accounts. So it's a 6-year access, and I know the teachers with the new technology they're getting with the Microsoft Goes, they were looking for the speaking and listening components that the online site does provide. So it's not just a standard textbook, but they have all the other bells and whistles that the online version provides. That's why you do see, there's 2 different classes of it in the same classroom. So they use the physical text in the room, and they can access it at any point 24/7 with their Microsoft Goes next year.
So do we have enrollment numbers for this yet? Does anybody know that?
Yeah, I think it's 37.
Okay.
So probably like 18 and 19, depending on how the seating works. And one more, the other was, if there's any questions on that, we'll jump to Senderos. And the backstory of Senderos, last year we adopted Senderos for the middle school, 7th and 8th grade, and also Senderos 1, which should often be maybe 9th or 10th grade. And so continuing with that theme, this is Senderos 2. So all the students that had it Spanish 1 class at the high school this year, as they move into Spanish 2 next year, they would continue with this series. And in talking to the Spanish teachers at the high school in particular, they like how the units are structured. They like the online super site, they call it, again, for that speaking and listening component. So this really is like a 2-year plan, whereas last year we had some folks from the high school presenting how it kind of streamlined the middle school and high school experience. Some of the feedback from the program review of the middle school was just that we want the 8th grade and 9th grade classrooms and the world languages look very similar. Speaking in the native language, using the same resources. So over the past year, the vertical teams in world language got together and they worked through the Senderos book to look at common activities, common assessments, to try to align the curriculum. So I know they're very excited about continuing for 3 years of that Senderos book with middle school 7 and 8, and then 1, and then now hopefully 2 at the high school level.
Okay, that explains it, because I feel like we're buying Senderos every single year, but
They wanted, yeah, I know, Senderos again. They wanted to defray the cost over 2 year purchasing it than just one big lump sum.
All right.
Yeah, I think you told us last year that was the, maybe not you, Ryan, but we were told last year that was the plan.
Yeah, because they wanted.
150, does that match up with our enrollment?
Yes, it does. It tends to be one of the more popular courses. They call it the advanced level at high school, so it is one of the most popular courses, which is why the numbers are so high. And if you were taking the upper level track, the honors track, that would put you in the APs eventually, but this would be the book for a traditional middle school grade level student and advanced the high school.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, are we done with the business items? Okay, then let's move into our wellness study. And this is part 2, continuation from our May curriculum committee meeting.
That's right. So tonight, we were planning to present the findings, preliminary findings at least, on the physical wellness aspect of the wellness, student wellness study, as well as the college and career readiness part of the wellness study. So Dr. Kent had taken the lead with looking into physical wellness within the school district. He's going to share that information. And Carolyn Riley from the DCIU is here tonight, and she's going to share information about the college and career readiness section as well.
Thanks, Dr. Kearney. Good evening, everyone. So with physical wellness, it really came up to 3 main areas thus far, and that was from feedback groups that we had, focus groups that we had throughout this over last months. And the 3 main categories being food allergies, physical activity, and concussions in terms of physical wellness. So first, dealing with food allergies. According to the CDC, 4% to 6% of all school-aged children do suffer from food allergies. So it's clearly something that schools need to pay attention to, and making sure that we're putting things in place so our students are as safe as they can possibly be. And we certainly when we move towards our recommendations in the fall, we have some good ideas already of things that can be put in place that are going to further address some concerns that have been raised. So if you look at our elementary schools, all 3 elementary schools do have nut-free tables. All 3 elementary schools do have some protocols in place as far as food in the classroom, but not identical protocols from building to building. And in the middle school and in the high school, you don't have nut-free tables in the cafeteria per se. And many secondary schools, you don't necessarily find them. And a lot of times, as far as food in the classroom, it may come down to teacher discretion at the secondary level. So, those examples, certainly something we'll be looking at streamlining district-wide, making some recommendations that can be put in place at all 3 elementaries and at the secondary level as well. Again, what we do, we work with our families, we work with our school nurses, we work with school counselors, administrators to make sure that the students that we do have who suffer from food allergies, that we're going to be proactive in making sure that they're in a safe environment and nothing harmful is going to occur. And obviously, should a reaction occur, then the teams in the buildings, respond very, very quickly to make sure those students get any medical attention that they may need. Sometimes challenges with food allergies is you may not know that you're allergic to a particular food if you've never been exposed to it. So, but we do know statistically, again, 4 to 6% of school-age children do suffer from allergies. So it's definitely something that we're going to take a close look at and make some good recommendations come to the fall. So physical activity is another area that certainly came up. And the recommendation from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, they did a 2008 report on physical activity guidelines, is that children and adolescents have 60 minutes of activity a day. And that's not just in school, but that's throughout a day. So when you look at 60 minutes a day being the recommendation, certainly things like recess, daily recess come into play there. So when you look at our elementary, the recommendation from the National Education of Elementary School Principals, as well as Shape America, which they have national standards for health and PE, the recommendation would be 20 minutes of recess a day. And you can see that at our elementary level, we do meet 20 minutes, and we exceed that for K through 5, and then further exceed it for K through 2 with an additional 20 minutes. They further recommend a activity type period outside of phys ed for secondary students. And again, that's not something that you necessarily would find common these days in secondary schools. In the middle school, we do have a recess period of about 15 minutes. That's part of lunch. But it's not a necessarily defined recess time and doesn't necessarily meet the proposed recommendations of some of these organizations. But it was certainly something that was brought forward, by parents, but looking at what we already do in the elementary level and what some elementary classroom teachers do with brain breaks, as well as secondary teachers with brain breaks, getting kids up and moving within the classroom. There's definitely some great things that are going on within our classrooms already in terms of physical activity. Our third area being concussions, and this year, Wayne Elementary, they are piloting a concussion management team, and that was trained through Delaware County Intermediate Unit. So looking forward to the fall, that's certainly going to be something we're looking at as far as recommendations for all of our buildings to have that type of team in place. At the middle school level, in terms of football, they added some things, guardian caps that they put on their helmets to better absorb contact within practice. And you've heard in the past about hawk tackling. There's been presentations on that, from the football coaches as well. When you look at things like impact testing, that baseline testing, so that when a concussion does occur, it really gives the medical professionals a better idea if there is a baseline testing in place. So impact testing currently is in place for contact sports at Radnor High School, as well as currently football at the middle school. And again, that's an area that we certainly would be looking at expanding, whether it be all athletics or all students, we're certainly still open to discussion on that. So those were our main three areas that did come up. So when you look at our preliminary findings on these three areas, understanding that we do have protocols, but they're not necessarily standardized protocols throughout the district, and that would be something that we would look forward to in the fall, making recommendations. As far as health and physical education classes, we do meet the PDE requirements of making sure that students are taking phys ed every single year, and that's kindergarten through 12th grade. And, when we're also looking at our health and wellness curriculum, some of the work that Tom Stecker did in reviewing our curriculum, we found that it was very robust in the offerings in our health and wellness classrooms as well. And there were some recommendations that were made that our health and wellness professionals are already looking at and incorporating into the health and wellness classrooms as well. Any questions you might have?
Andrew, Sarah, do you have questions on the physical wellness aspect of the report?
I don't have any questions. No.
Okay,
No, it seemed pretty straightforward to me.
yeah.
Okay, I just have one question, and it's about the, every 2 year, the baseline concussion. What happens when a student starts? In other words, when does your football start? What year in Radnor?
7th grade.
In 7th grade. So if I'm in 7th grade and I'm in an off year, does that mean that I'm not getting a baseline until next year?
So my understanding of baseline testing is it is done every 2 years. So if 7th grade was, and no decisions have been made, but if that was the recommendation that we start with 7th grade, because that's when PIAA sports begin, that would be a 7th grade, 9th grade, 11th grade testing cycle.
So you would, my question would be, you'd start at 7th, but I guess what I'd like to kind of lead into is if I'm then don't start in 7th. For instance, I didn't start playing until I was in 8th grade. I could have 7th, but I didn't. So if I'm in 8th grade and it's every 2 years, then does that mean I'm not going to get a baseline?
No, in my experience in other places, it's, they have records of who has been baseline tested.
Gotcha.
And then if that student was just starting in 8th grade, that testing
Okay.
would be in
As
8th
long as
grade,
we're
8th grade,
testing
10th
at
grade, 12th grade.
Whenever the initial start is, we're going to get baselines on all of our kids.
That's certainly a recommendation moving forward, yes.
Recommendation by.
So we'll bring that forward to you all in the fall as
Okay.
far as recommendations out of the committee to move forward, with physical wellness.
All right, thank you.
And I'm sure this is just review, but I don't remember. Can you define contact sports? So who gets a baseline?
So at the high school, and Mr. Bechtold, if I leave anything out, feel free to share. But maybe it's better to try to almost explain what non-contact sports are. So golf, tennis, swimming, they tend to be non-contact sports. Even baseball, softball, football, field hockey, soccer, they can all be considered contact sports because just the nature of the games. So I would say more sports than not currently receive baseline testing at the high school.
Okay. And other students, if we have a student with an identified brain injury or a previous accident, are they not included in any of this concussion baseline? Like, is that a separate?
So that, we're looking again at potentially concussion management teams by building. We're also looking at, do we want to just have baseline testing in place for student athletes, or should that be expanded? Because obviously, student athletes aren't the only children who could suffer a concussion, because concussions are occurring outside of school, inside school,
yeah.
during the school day, from lockers. There's various reasons that they do occur.
Okay. Are you
Which
asking
is-
a question?
Which is
Go
a
ahead.
very good question because the literature is actually pointing out that statistics will tell you that the students do get concussions at a very similar rate actually between athletics and life.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it would be worth our while to look in. We test the reading levels on our kids. We test all these other levels. it really wouldn't be a bad idea to look into what it would cost to have a concussion baseline for everybody, because, well, for instance, my nephew, he suffered concussions in baseball.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I can just imagine, when I see some of our cheerleading staff, then when they start throwing the people up in the air, and I'm cringing over here on the side, okay? That might be helpful, okay? So I think there's a lot more than what we're aware of, so I would like to put out there, I don't know what it costs, but if somebody gets a concussion and we have a baseline, we can be better prepared to get them better than if we don't know what to compare it to. So that's something that I would look into anyway.
Absolutely, and we have discussed that already as well.
And I believe there is a board member in the audience who has a question. Do you want to come forward and just ask it at this table, I guess?
Hey, how are you? Thank you for giving me a moment to ask my questions. I was reviewing the student wellness study, and I just was hoping you could clarify something for me. And that has to do with the scope of the study, because when it came to physical wellness, originally, I'm looking at the initial slide, the scope of wellness, physical wellness, was supposed to include physical education and health, then nutrition, and then athletics and concussions. So the data that's been presented to us today reflects food allergies, which I think is a subset of nutrition, physical activity, which I'm not sure is encompassing of physical education and health, and then there's concussions, but nothing about athletics, and there could be a very good reason for that, but I just wanted to know a little bit more about how we arrived at these findings when the original scope of the study seemed to be broader.
Sure. Thank you for your question, Mrs. Goldman. So, certainly things rose to the top through focus groups and what we were hearing from parents of concerns. And then we were looking at some work that has been done really not too long ago. There was a whole, I think you and I actually might have been on that nutrition committee Kevin Kane led not so long ago. So looking at some things that were already somewhat recently looked at, and how we could use some of that information to put in, because our report ultimately is well over 100 pages. So just because it didn't come up as a highlight doesn't necessarily mean it's not going to be in the report, because we do have quite a lot in the report that really hasn't been highlighted in all of our PowerPoint presentations, I would say. Would you agree with that, Dr. Kearney?
Yes. So the report itself has more information than this presentation, but we did pull out some of the information that we thought was most pertinent. So as far as health and wellness, I think Dr. Kent had taken a look at the curriculum in both physical education and our health courses, K through 12, and we had Tom Stecker look at those as well. Some of the other areas, student participation in athletics. I'm not sure, you might remember more specifically about nutritional guidelines, but I believe that was something you looked into as well.
It was, yes, as well. Federal guidelines, and then the work that was done in the past in that nutritional committee. We used our vertical teams, our health and physical education vertical team, teachers to look at what we're currently offering in health and phys ed, as well as as well as wellness. And that type of information is included in that much larger report that isn't finished, that ultimately we'll be reporting out on in September.
Okay, so I guess that was my question, because this is a...
Fall, October, November.
Okay. So this is one of those select annual district goals.
I missed it.
And so I didn't know anything about a more comprehensive report coming, but I just figured the scope of the study, there was so much thought put into what the scope should be, and it seemed much more expansive than what ultimately is being reported out here. So that was something that I was confused about. Is that prompting another question? I hear a little, no? Okay. And then the other question I had for you was, initially, board members were invited to sit down with Dr. Murray to talk about the scope of the study, and as she was framing it. And one of the things that came up when I sat down with her, and as I have said it might be an occupational hazard, but I think of things a lot through the lens of policy. And one of the ways that we come up with the work that we need to do as a policy committee is based on recommendations from staff. And so I was wondering if in the course of doing this, anybody was comparing some of the aspects of this study that are clearly informed by certain policies that are on our books, found anything that might require us to take a look at whether or not the practice is compliant with policy, whether or not the policy is sufficient. For example, you were talking a lot about concussions, and Policy 240 is safety in youth sports that was written back in 2013, so that's some time ago. And it was specifically, the purpose of it is to set forth guidelines for the evaluation, management, and response to head injuries and concussions in student athletes. So I was just wondering, is that policy something that you've been comparing notes with? And is there anything that you think the policy committee might ultimately need to take up in order to inform whatever needs to be in place in this district to protect students?
So thank you again for your question. So we did look at all the relevant policies. Again, that is in that much larger report. And in, some of the brief conversations we've been having here, I would think that some of the things we're talking about are going to expand outside of just student athletes and might be more so to all students, with baseline testing being an example, where it's just not the students involved in school-sponsored sports. So I would think that either an addendum to or a totally new policy that could encompass that and make sure that we're doing the best for all students.
Okay. And I had one last question, and that's about the source of this data. You said it came from focus groups. Is that right? Community focus groups?
Yes. The things that rose to the top is, yes,
right.
The areas. Yes.
So were those the focus groups because the focus groups that have been conducted recently had very few attendees?
No,
Are these separate focus groups from that?
So the initial scope of the study was rounded out by the focus groups that Dr. Murray had held, and Dr. Kent and the other leaders of the study participated in back in the fall and maybe into the winter. And then we presented back in, I think it was it February? What we would have is the scope of the study and the data sources that we're going to look at for this wellness study. The focus groups that we've had subsequent to this presentation, or at least the first part of this presentation, are based on this, what do the community and parents see as the priorities and any recommendations they might have for us to consider. So because this is the second part of this presentation, and the presentation itself began last month and was published last month, none of this has changed since then, and we've had the focus groups afterwards. I don't know if that was clear, but the most recent focus groups are not the ones that informed this presentation. This was created beforehand.
Okay. Well, hopefully you had a broader turnout for that, because one of the concerns I expressed is that the focus groups we've had recently, and it's through no fault of the district, but they haven't really turned out very many people. And so I would hate to see the focus groups, one of which you and I sat at with one community member together, and the others were maybe 5 people.
Mr. Batchelor was there too.
Yeah, well, Mr. Batchelor, I'm so sorry to leave you out. Yes, we had a cozy little focus group, the 4 of us.
We give a lot of personalized attention.
That's
to this
right.
district.
And if the word got out that you could have a one-on-one, maybe we'd have to schedule more. But I'm concerned that given how broad a population we have, when we have only a certain number of people come out, that we're not really getting the kind of representative feedback that we need in order to make sure that the reason why we're holding the focus groups is achieved.
And I think that's a fair point. I think it's also, as with the focus groups most recently, these are data points, but they're not the only ones that we consider, just as the scope of the study was informed by what people sort of let us know that they wanted us to take a look at. That wasn't the only reason that we might have put topics on or taken topics off of the report and the data sources themselves. I think when we were considering student wellness, there were other areas that we felt were important also that may have made their way into this report as well.
I was just going to add, the time of year, we can also look at additional focus groups, in the fall. I mean, part of it is just the time of year. It's difficult to get parents out at night. It's a busy time of year for everyone.
Okay, well, my only last comment on this would be that it's hard for me personally to think of things that are more important in the educational experience of students than student wellness. And obviously, it's not our sole responsibility as a school district to ensure student wellness, but it's a big part of it because students being well informs their ability to learn. And so if there's a chance for us to see something more than just, bless you, Asa, see, wellness. We want to make sure our students are well. He sneezed on the truth. So, you know, I don't know how the rest of the board feels, but as good as this information is, I'd really appreciate knowing more about what's in this voluminous report, because it wouldn't have made it to the level of a district goal if it hadn't been that crucially important. I mean, everything on curriculum's agenda is important, but when we identify district goals, they're super important, and wellness, to me, there's really nothing more important than students' wellness.
So our timeline and our plan is to make the report available in the fall, and we'll be back here most likely presenting the recommendations from that report at this time. You know, it is a draft, it's still being worked on, and it's currently at 92 pages, so it is much more than what's in this presentation, but I think the presentation captures a lot of the highlights, at least, from it.
Okay. All right, that's for that part of the report. I had a couple other questions for the other part. Thank you.
Okay.
Lydia, before we respond,
Yeah, go ahead, Sarah.
I'm sorry, I actually did have one question, and I hesitate to ask it because I don't want it to sound like I'm anti-activity. But I had a question. When our high school athletes participate in an after-school sport, which is going to be presumably an hour or two most days after school, do we still require them to participate in a phys ed course?
Yes, we do, and that's school code as well.
So Pennsylvania state law requires that, even if they're getting some other physical activity?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. It seems to me like an opportunity to create less stress for them by not requiring them to take PE if they could have a study hall to make up some of the work they can't do right after school as well.
Yeah.
But okay.
I believe we have talked about that in the past as well, and I think we always keep landing on the fact that we have to do it.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it's a good concern. And just with regard to the whole wellness study, my concern, in addition to seconding Ms. Goldman's idea that this is critically important, I'm a little bit concerned with, I think it's a fact, all the changing of administrators. Dr. Murray originally led this, and obviously she's not here. Dr. McQuiggan's been integral to this. Dr. Barczyk's been integral to this. I just don't want to lose pieces of all that we found. And so it is going to fall to those that are left, and it's going to be a lot of work. And so just to tell you our appreciation for keeping the balls in the air and keeping, you know, everybody informed, because this has been a long-term and really important project. So we don't want to lose any of this.
If I could jump in real
Yeah.
quick, I think that if I'm understanding correctly, Conestoga is a school that allows their student athletes to opt out of phys ed classes. So maybe I'm misunderstanding, but I don't think it's illegal.
That's come up before. They
yeah.
do it.
It is actually
And
illegal.
we've looked at it, I think, 2 or 3 times in the past, and we've decided that we're not going to go that way. So,
Okay, yeah, just
yes, but you're right.
No,
They have a different view
because,
on it.
like, I actually was a student athlete in high school in the Radnor area. I obviously went to private school, but I did not have to take phys ed, and it was valuable to have that study time.
But I think it's not only the fact that it's illegal, we have a health and physical education curriculum that we put in place.
And standards set out by the
standards.
state.
And there, if you go to play football, for instance, you're not gonna learn all these other things that we're trying to teach. Okay, it could be the nutrition piece, it could be sleep, it could be whatever. So even if it was legal, it doesn't mean that we would do it. We need to be able to, up here, we're trying to do what's in the best interest of all the students that we have to serve. That said, we're not doing it. Okay, now, to get back to my question that I was thinking about, let me try to phrase this in something that would be presentable. This report that we have, multi-page report, okay? We ever think of doing almost like a peer review, giving it to our health and phys ed department and have them review this, since that's that's basically a lot of what they do, and then they would then have the ability to come back and critique and give it to us for our information, since we do have that resource.
Dr. Kent's been working with the Health and Wellness Department as part of the study and the report, so
No,
they've contributed to it?
They have contributed, I understand that, but I would love to have a full circle. I would love to have something, for me to read, would be so valuable to have something submitted by our teachers that says, we looked at this study, this is what we come up with, boom, boom, boom. It just seems to me that we have a missed opportunity to close a cycle. I understand about having people contribute and participate and everything else, but I think it would be much more incentivizing towards teachers if, in fact, we give them the opportunity to look over the product and critique a little bit. If you wanted to first critique to you guys, fine, and then do a little adjustments, and then it could come to us. I don't care. But what I am interested is getting teacher feedback on this particular report.
So the presentation that I just delivered to you, I did deliver to all the K through 12 health and phys ed teachers at our last in-service day. It led to great discussion and some things.
I missed that.
Some things that are going to lead to recommendations as well. So point taken. Certainly, I am continuing to work in conjunction with them and share out ultimately anything prior to sharing with you with them. And we'll continue to meet in our vertical team as well with K through 12 representation and work through our report.
Because I think it would be, and maybe this is a larger discussion that we need. We keep on talking about putting in initiatives and different things like that. I think it's closing the loop on before we continue to move forward. And even at that point, when we do evaluations, and we evaluate as we move forward with the wellness, I think that component would be very valuable to have. It's my opinion. Of course, I am a retired teacher, so.
No, your point's a great point, Mr. Mann. Chuck, I think that, that's one of the things we did with the sleep. We tried to make sure that whatever we're presenting here to the board, we first had an opportunity to present it to the teachers. Right. And get their feedback. That's an important piece.
That's all I have. Thank you very much.
All
Thank
right,
you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Are we moving on to college and career?
Yes, so Mrs. Riley's going to come up, and she's going to share the work that she and other people have done on that section of the report.
How are you, Chuck?
How's your mom?
She's fine, thanks.
Good. Tell her I said hello.
I surely will. Thank
Welcome.
you. Thank you. Is this?
Do you want to just introduce yourselves for the folks on the phone? We've got new administrators here,
Oh,
participants.
hi, I'm Carolyn Riley. I work for the DCIU, and I've been working this school year in a contract position with Radnor School District, working on the 339 compliance plan.
Denny McKnight, I'm interim administrator, one more day, and
Well,
I
you're
have
going to be
been-
the one to carry this through to completion. So accountable.
I've been working with the 339 plan since I came here, picked it up from Kelly Murray, and I'm ready to hand it off to the next individual who's going to take great care of it.
Okay.
I think we met you both last month. I appreciate you coming back to talk to us in more detail.
Yes, thank you. So, where to begin?
There we go.
Yeah. But as many of you may or may not know, through the state, 339 compliance was handed down school year 2017-18, just a little background knowledge. Through the efforts of Dr. Kevin Kane, who was here and is now over at the IU as my supervisor, which is kind of a funny circle. He worked very diligently with his department and the counselors to, in a lot of, giving you a lot of credence as a district, that within that year, he got everyone into compliance when it was really kind of could have been a softer rollout. So I give a lot of credit to you as a district to begin with, because I worked with various districts at this point, and many are not anywhere near where you are. So I give kudos to that to begin with. So what we started to look at in terms of basically the three prongs in terms of the study was first to look at what is the district doing in terms of activities and artifacts that could be stored that would be aligned with the standards. The second thing was to put a system in place that would allow for those artifacts to be stored, 3rd through 12th or K through 12th, if the K through 5 counselors, did activities that they would want in there, that would follow those students as a portfolio and could be accessed at any point by those students or their families and or by the state if audited. So that was the second piece. And the third piece was, particularly in the role that I was doing, was in supporting and helping the school counselors at each level in their roles in coming up with the activities, organizing the activities, planning them, and then coming up with ways that the students could be assessed, whether through reflection or conversation or activity, so that to complete those artifacts. One of the first pieces we looked at in terms of data was actually how does Radnor as a school district stack up in terms of students that graduate, where do they go to school from here, how many of them go to school versus go to trade versus go into the military, how many of them complete a degree within 6 years. And so as you know, and is always coming out, Radnor is always at the top of that list, certainly within our county and in the country, in terms of students that not only obviously graduate from our high school, but also then go on to higher education of some form. So these are just 3 years that we looked at in terms of class totals, who went to school, where they went to school, how long it took them to complete a degree. For the most part, the percentages are very favorable and positive, with the exception of where we're looking at Black or African American students with a lower percentage than we would like. But across the board overall, the total completion average is very favorable. The second piece we looked at was the actual counseling staff or support staff within each school. So when we look at how many counselors are in each building and the ratios that are then represented as a result of that, for the most part, your school, your district is in accordance with what is suggested, both statewide and nationally. The ratio, the favorable ratio is 250 to 1. When we look at social worker to student ratio and counselor to student ratio. So many of your schools are at that point, with the exception of Ithan and Radnor Elementary School. They're a little bit on the higher end, especially at Radnor Elementary School, and Wayne as well. Did you want to add something?
I think the important thing, not only the student to counselor ratio, but is the tasks that the individual counselors perform at the different levels.
Right.
And I think one of our recommendations is going to be to take a look at those kinds of tasks. We've asked the counselors to identify the tasks that they are asked to perform that are classified as non-counselor duties, and then sometime recommend that we take a look at that and find out how we can unburden them with those duties so that they can spend all of their time doing what are called counselor duties. And again, that will be one of the recommendations that will come forth in the fall.
In the fall.
More questions when you're finished, or do you want it as we go along?
Whatever suits the panel, I don't mind.
Can you go back to
I was holding mine till the end because I've got so many.
Well,
Okay,
if you have a whole lot, it might be better to get them out as you think.
Yeah,
of
we
them,
don't have
unless
we
you
don't have a
break
whole
them
lot
down.
There's
of slides
We
to
can
go.
one more slide left on this section, then we'll take
I can wait
questions.
for one slide.
All
I
right.
might remember.
so we have one more slide of the presentation, and then just everyone save your questions, and we'll backtrack and pick up the conversation there, so.
And so this is what this slide shows, is what Denny was talking about in terms of how the counselor's time is spent. 339 is a whole nother added piece to them in terms of kind of getting their arms around it. But what we've certainly found is that many pieces are done within curriculum. Many pieces are activities that the counselors were already doing. So through the course of this year, we found that, there's a lot of those pieces that are kind of already in place but needed to be stored and in a meaningful way.
And I think that, if you just go back real quick, Jim, that middle bullet there where other activity domains, that's one we're really gonna focus on, that we think we might be able to provide some relief for counselors by taking some of those other activities away from them. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's okay. And just if we could go back real quick too, in that middle one where it has the SEL piece, Dr. Kane's not here, Dan, but there's a lot of overlap in his piece with social emotional learning and also this college and career readiness piece, where in the younger grades, we're looking at understanding self and others, as they go through the grades, starting to look at skills such as employability, likability, things that you may be interested in, things like that. So within those the two prongs of the study, there is some overlap as well. So just some preliminary findings, and again, there's a lot more that will go into this in the final report. But to this point, to this date, the school district has collected all the artifacts for each student in your district to be in compliance. Within each school, there are some different nuances that had occurred, especially through this year, as I've been working through it. I'm sure they were there last year too, but things that came up that we had to kind of go back and question PDE, such as a student who transfers in May of junior year, when do the counselors then have to work with them, and how many artifacts will they need, and things such as that point. So I've had some conversations with Mike Thompson, and JJ Lemon has as well. So we have a good conversation going there. There's been concerted effort to expose students in grades 4, 5, 8, and 9 to career and technical education, with either visits to the technical high schools or the technical high schools coming to the schools. And this was really to kind of bridge that gap that we're starting to see statewide and nationwide, where there's a lack of skilled laborers and students wanting to go into those sorts of positions. So there was a lot more exposure to those pieces this year. Again, your graduation rate and college completion rate are higher than state and national averages. Student completion of higher education degrees far exceeds the national average, again, with the exception of that piece of Black and African American students. And another finding that we found is that counselor responsibilities vary from school to school, so which is very typical in districts. Certainly the middle and the high school is a different picture than what an elementary school counselor may be handling on the day-to-day as well. So, but all in all, the activities that they are all working on and doing with the students are in line with the standards of 339.
Okay, Sarah, Andrew, we're now at the slide of questions. I'm gonna put this first to Chuck, since he was raring to go, and then we'll continue the conversation.
Okay, if we go back to the slide, it says data review, counseling. No, okay, thank you. If you can go back, yeah, that one there. So if we were to put into our right now, our calculation does not include all the other staff members, is that correct?
Correct.
So if we were to identify, and that's kind of what I think you're telling me, if we were to identify the work that the other staff are actually doing that's related to counseling, correct, then our actual numbers would go down, because you have an additional, how many people do we have additional that are doing counseling, might be doing, either they're doing counseling work or they're doing the work that the counselors are doing.
Would have been doing had they not been there, true.
Right, so it could be work that the counselors may not be required to do because it might be better off being done by somebody else. And that's what we're looking into. And if we do that, then our actual ratio numbers could go down. Is that correct?
Yes.
We would have the same, I guess my point is, we actually have more people doing the job than those counselors that you're counting.
Absolutely.
Okay?
Absolutely.
So once we divide that back up, and you're either then going to associate, if say the 9 to 12 social worker is doing this component of counseling, and we're not counting that at this point in time.
Not in those ratios, no.
Right, not in those ratios. Well, the ratios really won't change because it's basically the children population.
Right.
But what I'm saying is, if that, say, is a quarter person, I don't like to use that term, but you know what I mean?
Right.
then that goes in to the calculation. And then if you have the SEL coach, if that is say, a one full-time employee that's doing counseling, or the percentage of the counseling, that, if that's included, that which could be included in the counseling piece if they're doing the counseling, then maybe our numbers at the elementary school might look better.
And it
And
is
actually
very,
be better. It's better than they look, let me
I
put it
don't
that way.
know. I would
I-
think
And
it
it-
just the opposite. I would think
I
that
disagree.
the counselors are doing way more
Yeah.
kind of social work type things that
But
we
no.
don't have staffing for. I
No.
think they're spread, the counselors, I don't think any of these people are helping the counselors.
Oh, I would hope they
think
are.
they're, I think they're understaffed as well,
No.
but you
Well, I was,
speak to it.
I was going to just say that I appreciate that point,
Right,
but
right.
I'd also be cautious to not blur those roles.
Right, I want to establish what those roles are. I don't know exactly what they are,
Okay.
and what I'm hearing is we're going to find that out.
Well, and I think that's part of the goal now is to be sharing where we are with the data. And if we're going to have a conversation about our counselors and our counselors, the ratio, we should also make sure that we're having a more fuller conversation about all the different personnel we have and all those different pieces and what they do. Where that conversation takes us and where that takes us with loads and recommendations is wide open, and that's for the discussion. But I think it would be, we need to do our it would be unfair for us just to look at one component. I think it's important that we look at all the different staff we have as we look at that. And that's one of the things that I know Jenny Lesage has been looking at, as we've looked at, how can we make sure that we are utilizing our staff that we have in the best manner to serve our students.
But now, I mean, we did do that when this area was under audit.
Right.
So you remember, we did look at all
We
those.
did, but I'm looking at
And we actually added
today
some
forward is
positions.
basically,
Yeah. So
For
it-
instance, you have a K-12 counseling support person. I would think they have something to do with counseling. I would hope. I don't know what they do. Yeah, right. So that's counseling. That's counseling.
Oh, that's the Karen person. Oh.
Foundation, yeah, that's the
Right,
drug and
right,
alcohol.
but I'm saying that that's not in our ratio.
No, it's not.
Right, that's
No,
all I'm
it's not.
saying. is-
But that's why they were added
That's
here.
Right,
Yeah.
so, once we get all this done, in other words, I believe we may be doing a better job than the ratios. The ratios don't look very good.
No.
And I think that may not be telling us the whole story about what we're doing. That's my point, that's all. So I'm just looking forward to finding out the whole story,
Yeah, whenever you
whenever
guys
it
have
comes
that
back.
conversation. But I mean, just the Karen,
By tomorrow, though, because tomorrow's your last day.
I actually,
don't worry,
he's burning the,
Jim has my phone number.
burning the candle at both ends. And yes, I think that's an honest thing to want to investigate, but, just in particular, looking at two positions on that other staff, the full-time Karen person is doing drug and alcohol. She's not in the counseling office seeing kids as they're coming in off the bus and then they've had a rough morning kind of thing.
True. But we would then, if we didn't have that person, then maybe the drug and alcohol would
The
then.
counselor.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's, yeah,
It's got to be a whole team working together. and
Right.
that's-
right.
And that's the whole idea of the MTSS approach also, is to really identify what we have, what's available, what we need. And if we have needs, then we have to identify those and go after them.
Right,
So,
right.
Thank you.
Good, sure.
Did you have other
I do not have
specific
anything.
questions? Okay, Sarah, do you want to start with your questions?
Yeah, I'll start with this slide since we're already here.
Okay.
I guess, so I just want to point out that the way the ratios look, we've got only one school building actually meeting the recommended counselor ratio, but I'm a little confused, and if we need to pick this up another time because it's too much detail, that's fine, but we're talking about one of these is a ratio recommendation for college admission counseling, and the other is for school counselors. So I guess my question is, I think of counselors, just non-college counselors, as people who counsel for all kinds of other things, and I think of a college counselor as a very specific type of role. And my question is whether we're kind of blending the two at the high school So whether any of these are actually meeting one or the other of those sets of goals. And then I noticed that the social worker ratio should be 250 to 1, and we've got exactly 2 for the whole district.
Yep.
Now, I don't know how the school psychologists fit into kind of the counselor role. Chuck's point about maybe some of these ratios could be a little bit better than they appear. And I know we've already approved adding 2 counselors next year, but I don't think those are permanent roles, right? They're outside contracts we've hired, that we're going to hire. And then just looking at this, I'm thinking there's some drastic inequality among our elementary schools, you know, from a workload standpoint for the counselors, but also from a services standpoint to our students. You can't tell me that one person can cover 629 students as well as another one is covering 447. The gap between those is huge. And I guess I'm wondering how whether we should be having, the counselor at IES help the other 2 elementary schools, even just a little bit, given how much more overburdened that the counselors there seem to be. So I guess these are more comments than necessarily questions. It sounds like this is something that we really need to talk about, and focus on in depth as an individual conversation. But I know when we set this as a district goal at the board, when we talked about it, we were very clear, at least I was when I talked to Kelly Murray, but I know others were as well, that we saw counseling in 2 separate buckets. And I'm not sure it was broken out this way. And again, I'm not blaming anyone who's here, because I know there's been a lot of changing of the guard. But I think we really did see college counseling as one issue, and counseling slash psychologists slash social workers, kind of the more emotional counseling, as an entirely separate bucket. And I think they've been combined here in ways that may be creating confusion for the board and may not be entirely productive, as we're trying to find solutions. So that was the data review for counseling. If Andrew has comments on that, I'm happy to, stick with the same slide, but then I had questions about the higher ed piece too.
No, I'll comment when you're done. Fine.
Okay. So the higher education completion, do we know what the state and national averages are for Black or African American higher education?
That was exactly my question.
We do have that data, but we didn't include it in here because we were looking at.
I don't think we had it broken out by I don't think it broken out by subgroup. We had it as the national percentage was 60%. We had the overall national percentage at 60% completion, but it wasn't broken out by subgroup.
Right.
Okay, because on the preliminary
Average
findings
college
slide, next to the last
graduation
bullet,
rate.
They don't have it.
can be read, I think, to imply that we meet national averages even for Black and African American students, and I don't know that that could possibly be true. But I find those numbers really disturbing, and I hope they were disturbing to the administrators who looked at this. Because I'm assuming when we say higher education, we're not just talking about 4-year liberal arts colleges. We're talking about any kind of higher education degree. So this would include a technical degree, at Delaware Community College, or something else that's not necessarily, like I said, liberal arts. Am I correct in that understanding of higher education?
It was just for.
It was for college.
It was a college.
and university.
Yeah, it was university.
With a bachelor's within 6 years.
So if you,
4-year
if you
college,
went to
but
a
taking,
technical college, would that count?
no.
No, but not
Would
be
not.
displayed on this chart.
Post-secondary ed would include those other types there.
Post-secondary ed would, yes. But
It
this
would
is just,
include technical education.
right, or
We're saying that
military
within
or,
6 years of graduation, only 22% of our class of 2012 African-American students got any kind of completed any kind of higher education degree.
No,
No.
earned
bachelor's
a
degree.
bachelor's degree.
Bachelor degree, 4-year.
These numbers are for a 4-year bachelor's degree.
Where's the rate of, so we are saying we aren't tracking whether they got some kind of technical degree ever?
This is the National Clearinghouse data for the district, so it wasn't available.
Okay.
Could we look at it?
And then I know this
We have to
says
collect
that
that
you
online.
can't report on subgroups with fewer than 10 students. We don't, and maybe it's not in the reporting that you've got, but we don't have a way to track English language learners and their completion. That's just been on my mind because of other subjects later on in the meeting.
Not that,
Not-
yeah.
Not that I'm aware of.
All right, so we don't have that data, or we can't get that data? Do
We
we?
have not
I
yet
don't know.
collected it, that I'm aware of.
I don't think it's available.
It's not available,
no.
okay.
So what some schools do, like some of the Delaware County technical schools and whatnot, they collect their own data. They contact their students a year later and do satisfaction surveys. But, you know, we've talked about doing some of those things, but in order to get some of that detail, we would have to survey our own students, do follow-ups with them.
Okay.
Which is part of coming recommendations, quite
Okay.
potentially.
Yeah, because this was exactly my question, Sarah, was that Black African American number, and what really does it mean? How does it compare nationally? I had the exact same quandary, so I don't know how we take it from there, but
No, we'll be
Yeah.
fine.
We had the same reaction as well.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm sure. Sarah, other questions?
No, I just wanted to say I appreciated that the team had already identified that perhaps ways to make our counselors more valuable would be to take some of the administrative or other activities that don't have to be done by them. We can really dedicate them to their specific purpose. So thank you for pulling all this information together.
Thank you.
Okay. Andrew, did you have anything that you want to follow up on?
Sure, yeah, just a couple of quick ideas. So, first of all, thank you for all these good data, all this good information, it's great. But about counselors and the ratios, et cetera, I just want to follow up on other comments that have been made that I think it's something that we should be proud of, that we have a comparatively pretty good ratio when you look at the national average, even the Pennsylvania averages in some of those areas. But I think personally that these ratios are something that we should be really aiming pretty hard for. And if I had my druthers, we would make additional counselors, a permanent part of our workforce rather than something that we outsource, so that we get closer to that 250 to 1 ratio. And that leads to a couple of other ideas that are linked to earlier parts of the wellness presentation. I think that digital practices and using digital technology, I think, is another part of the wellness study that could be expanded at some point, so that we learn more about how our young people are using technology and how that relates to other data in the wellness study. I think, this harkens back to our previous meeting, but, those data about mental health and use of substances, et cetera, are pretty strong results. And I think that we should be looking at these counseling data, tying it back to those other aspects of the wellness study, to make a very strong case for having more counselors and having more counselors work full-time in the district. It's just an idea, but I think that we'll just pull together some of those data. And yeah, I think that wraps up most of my comments. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. I agree with that completely as well. Do you have anything else you want to question, Andrew?
Nope, that's it.
Okay. Asa, did you have anything that came to mind while you were listening to this?
Yeah, I guess I have a couple of things. First off, I understand that the other staff, they might be contributing to some of the duties that the counselors do, but we have to make sure that we're, as has been said before, we're not blurring the lines, because I'm sure there is a specific ratio that some psychology body might want for a psychologist to student. So we can't really count a psychologist as a counselor for the purpose of bettering our ratio, because they serve a different purpose. So I think we need to be careful with kind of saying that they do the same duties, or that our ratios aren't too high. I think it's incredibly important to have more counselors. And not to blur the lines or I'm sorry, not to force a connection where there might not be one, but I know that in a previous meeting we talked about how the NAACP wasn't too happy with us because there was a disproportionate amount of African American students who were receiving behavioral reports, I guess, to put it bluntly. And I'm wondering if having more counselors might help with that, or help them, make the transition to college easier. I don't know if there is a connection, but I think certainly more of these emotional counselors rather than the college counselors could provide some guidance that we might not have, just because our ratios are, they're only slightly below the national average.
So excellent.
Thank
You always
you.
come up with
I know.
insightful comments.
so
Isn't he
impressive every
wonderful? I
time.
know.
Love this kid. Yeah.
And we could schedule some time in August, because I think one of the things we need to do is have some opportunities for the board to see what involves in all these different loads, because I think Asa's points are good points, but we also need to keep in mind how we're going to contract 2 mental health specialists this coming school year. The whole goal of contracting the 2 additional mental health specialists is what we were finding in some of our concerns, and also for us as a district to understand where the needs are. Try to understand, do those mental health specialists, as much as we need to look at all of those ratios and see what are the ratios for psychologists at different pieces, but also understand how does mental health specialists possibly lighten the load for a counselor who's working on college planning for the counselors. So they are all intermingled. So we do have to be careful from both angles as we discuss this topic to see how they all go together. And I think it would be important for us as a district to have, we can, in August or September, have Mrs. Lesage, and George Regal give a presentation and look at how are these opportunities we have to look at our staff, look at what our staff are doing, and to make sure we have staff in the right place and have the opportunity to do the things we need them to be doing. And I think it's a conversation we need to continue as a district. So your points are good points.
Yeah,
Thank you, Ken. If I may, just very quickly, I think it would be good to get some kind of self-report or interview data from our counselors about the work that they do and about their workload and some of their input on these issues. And perhaps, Ken, that could be part of that meeting in August.
Yes.
Yeah, we have collected, I guess that's
Are we
right.
on?
We have collected that data from the counselors, not based on a strict desk audit, but we do have that information that would certainly be helpful for that kind of a meeting. So we would be able to, plus they should be included in the discussion also.
Well, and I think it's important to keep in mind that the requirements and the mandates that fall under all of these areas, the psychologists, the counselors, the social workers, those just keep growing. I mean, I know that even the IEP process has turned into something that you wouldn't have recognized even 5 years ago. So it's that not only, ferreting out what everybody does, but keeping in mind that the demands just keep growing. And I think we're dealing with more complex students, too, coming into the districts. I know we are. So it's an ongoing, I think it's an ongoing need. And I absolutely second what you're saying, Andrew. I think that this is an area that we really need to support and make sure that we're funding that properly.
Right. Can I just add that when I talked about the ratio numbers, that's like fuzzy math to me, okay? I'm more concerned about what we're actually doing with our students, how they're being taken care of, how their needs are being met. That's more or less what I was talking about.
And that's the overarching of the wellness.
Exactly.
If they're not, if the SEL piece isn't there, if the mental health piece isn't, whatever, we're not going to.
Exactly.
you
And
know,
I'd also,
graduate
since
best
this
student.
is could be my last opportunity to thank Mr. McKnight here, I'd like to thank you for what you've done for us in the past again, and in the future, when you come back. We look forward to that smiling face.
Thank you for the opportunity.
We're going to have stability.
I've enjoyed all my time here.
I actually have a
Call you in
question.
September, Dr. McKnight, thank you.
I have a more mundane question. What did we put in place as the system to capture the 339 data? So what did we decide to
At
do?
the high school level,
Yeah.
they were already using Naviance, which
Okay,
isn't
right.
exactly what it was built for, but
Right.
it serves the purpose for this reason. At the elementary level, they were initially using Schoology. But over the course of this year, they've been able to access Naviance, and so we will have all the artifacts stored just in Naviance.
So everyone will be on Naviance.
Yes.
This will be part of your record on Naviance.
And that was the goal at the beginning of the year, was to make sure that we were on
Okay.
a single system.
Yeah.
So, and it's all electronic, then
It's all-
nobody's like
yeah.
keeping little files squirreled away anywhere, okay?
Right.
Great.
Yeah.
And I had one other, where was it? Oh, you mentioned tasks that you were gonna take off of the counselor's workload, like activities in the other activity domain. Can you
as a
just
single-
highlight what that would be
Just as
to
a
you?
single example.
Yes,
Right now in our elementary schools, the school counselors are responsible for the PSSA testing. And that's a huge burden for 3 weeks out of
Right,
every
okay.
spring. And they do that now, and they do that at the expense of doing things
yeah.
that
Definitely.
they might do in the counselor realm.
Yeah,
So
and
again,
somebody
it's
else can
something
do
we
it,
need to
yeah.
look at and say, okay, this is what they do, this is what it costs us in terms of counselor contact with students. How can we better do that so as to free them up to do the things, so as Chuck said.
Right.
Yes,
Okay, so this is a conversation to be continued in August, is that where we're headed? Okay, because I
In the
know
fall.
I have other questions, I know other board members have questions, so we will be looping back to this in August, it sounds like. Okay,
So I'd like to thank everyone who's been part of the study to this point. There's, as you've heard, there's still work to be done, but we've come a long way, and the people who've contributed, both who are here tonight, as well as people who've been working in our buildings on this, have done an awful lot of good work and gathered some good data for us to get a picture of student wellness in a variety of areas. So I appreciate everything that they've done. And also wanted to mention that the community and parents can still contribute thoughts or input that they might have through the email address that we'd set out at wellness@rtsd.org. So wellness@rtsd.org.
yeah, and I think it's a credit to everyone that there's such interest all around in making sure our students are well, that we're focused on this. I see a hand in the back of the room. All right, we have a question from the board president. Come forward, Mrs. Stern.
Need another seat?
No, that's okay. Susan Stern. So the one thing, just because I looked at the numbers of it. The African American and Black students, the numbers were dramatically lower.
Right.
What that doesn't, and actually, I would say this about the whole slide, and Lydia will tell you, I usually look things mathematically. What that didn't tell us is, of those various classes, whether you were Asian, white, male, female, African American, what percentage of those students from those graduating classes were attempting a four-year degree? So if,
We don't know.
well, that's my point, is that it would be an important piece to understand. So 22% of the Black students in, I think it was the 2012 class, I don't have the slide in front of me, is that reflective of 100% of the students who had the intention to seek a four-year degree? Or did not all of our students of color, were they not all attempting it? And so the number was going to be disparate. That's the one thing I'm not quite understanding about that. And then I guess, although that's taken from the National Clearinghouse, if we have a way to survey our own students, and I don't know if we do or don't, to follow up on Ace's point about the counselors, you know, we need to understand, why are our students not completing a four-year degree in 6 years? Is it a financial impediment? Is it an academic challenge? Or is there some other reason? And let's try to understand the reason that they're not completing a four-year degree, if that's their intention.
Right, so
that's it.
we will pick this up again. We have
Yeah,
two
no,
other
that's
major
it.
presentations tonight. My apologies to everyone who's waiting to
I just
present.
wanted to say thank you as well. It's been a wonderful experience working with the district this year, and I'm finished, but I'll be at the IU, and if anybody needs me.
Yes, thank you,
Yeah,
Carolyn, for all
thank
the
you
work you
so
did for us.
much. You've been a huge
appreciate it.
contributor to this. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, how do we want to do
Okay,
this, Dr.
so
McQueen?
we're going to have our ELD teachers come up first,
Okay.
just because we had them next on the agenda. I'm still holding out hope that everyone's read their presentations, and we're going to be able to hear from both groups today. So we have two groups with us today. These two groups have a few things in common. They both represent K to 12. One is K to 12 English language learners, and the other is K to 12 library. The other thing that the two groups have in common is that they, on an ongoing basis, work tirelessly to make sure that what they do with our students is aligned both vertically and horizontally. Each one of these ladies is in a different school building, but they all go out of their way on in-service days and in between in-service days and through technology and whatnot to make sure that our students are getting consistent programs that make sense from kindergarten all the way through 12th grade. They both underwent an audit this year. Both had new things in their area, new standards, new requirements, new regulations. So while the audit was timely because there were many new things in their fields, also very challenging, and they both have some very high expectations for themselves and what they'd like to accomplish over the next couple of years. So we'll start with our ELD teachers, who will begin by introducing themselves, and then they will answer questions and kind of give you a summary of their presentation, but then also be ready to hear your questions as well. So do you want to start by introducing yourselves and giving your buildings?
Sure.
Thanks.
I'm Charlene Mastro at Radnor High School.
Hi, I'm Teresa Park at Ethan Elementary School.
Hi, Ashley Miller, Radnor Middle School.
And I'm Sarah Steiner, Wayne Elementary School.
I don't know who's got. Oh, can we? We can click it.
Thank you very much.
Do a side button.
Nothing's happening. Nothing's happening. Is it plugged in? Okay, go ahead. Oh, that's right.
Oh yeah, we already introduced ourselves. Okay, go to the next one.
Okay, so I'm going to start going through some data with you that we found about our students and our enrollment. Everybody here is very excited to be here. We've done a lot of work, and thank you all for taking the time to listen to us and our changes that we would like to make to improve the program to be as best it can. As you can see, our enrollment growth has trended upwards in the past few years in the ELD department. You can see, sorry, I'm not trying to look at it in front of me. 2015, 2016, we had about 145 students up until we recently ran the numbers right before we came here, and we're up to 173 students total, and that includes current EL students that are receiving direct instruction from an EL teacher, as well as students that are monitored and have exited the program. So there has been a steady growth for us over the past few years. Double click. So you can take a look at the next slide, shows you the enrollment by building. And the light colored one is the current EL students that are receiving direct instruction in each building. The middle colored one, no, I lied, excuse me. The light colored one is the total enrollment per building. The middle colored one is the students that are receiving direct instruction, and the darker colored one are the monitored students that we're keeping an eye on that have exited the program. So in Radnor Elementary School, there's 28 students total. In Ithan, there's 30 students total. At Wayne, there's 46. At Radnor Middle, there's 43. And at the high school, there's 34. The elementary schools carry a heavier load of students receiving direct instruction, and the middle and high school carry heavier loads of students that have exited the program previously. So the students here at the Radnor Township School District come from 38 different countries, and they speak 35 different languages. And combined here between all of us, we speak English to most of the students. We speak a little bit of Spanish, some of us. Teresa speaks Korean. So other than that, the students are receiving direct English instruction from us at all times, but we do our best to learn greetings and common phrases in different languages to try and make the students feel welcome. And you can see the 38 different countries that they're from right here.
So So this is just a snapshot of our English learners. This was taken from our Culture Buddy celebration, where English learners are paired with peers from different language backgrounds, and they make home visits to teach each other about their cultures. At the end of the year, they have a big celebration. And then, oh, yep. And then and then the next slide shows, these were some photos from the EL picnic, end of the year picnic, where students brought food that represented their cultures. And then the photo on the right is from the EL parent focus group meeting we had with our students. And of course, graduation. And also we had a career fair for our English language learners hosted by a college fair for our English language learners hosted by Montgomery County Community College.
Okay, so we just wanted to give you a little bit of an overview of who's in our program and why we're here and what we're here to serve. That's why we included some pictures and a little bit of information just to give you the idea of the kids that are actually enrolled in the program. So the reason that we had to do this, or we did do the audit part of it, was to kind of take an overview of our program and what exactly needed to be updated and changed in relation to the new codes, both in Pennsylvania and also federal law. So the presentation gives you a little bit of overview over the federal law. Also, it refers back to the mission statement. The RTSD mission statement talks about all students, engaging all students, and then that kind of goes in hand in hand with the RTSD core value of respecting and valuing diversity. So here, as part of our job, what we're doing is trying to make sure that diversity is truly being valued and respected, and that was also a part of the audit that we did. So the Every Student Succeeds Act, or otherwise known as ESSA, that was implemented at the federal level and then brought down and changed a little bit, but to be implemented within Pennsylvania, in the state of Pennsylvania. It covers these areas, these 6 areas, plus the ones on the next slide. So there's a total of 10, and that's right in the slides in front of you. So we're talking about how we identify students, how we work with students that we're providing them a sound program, that they're able to move through the program at a reasonable rate, that we are effectively staffed, that we have enough that we need so that we're able to meet the student needs. We're ensuring equal opportunities for all of our students. That's a big deal, making sure that they have full access to the curriculum and that they also have access to extracurricular programming. Another key area is avoiding unnecessary segregation of these students and ensuring that students with disabilities also have access to both the EL program and the core content curriculum. That goes in hand with students who are opting out of services. That was also a big change in relation to ESSA and what happened with the state. Students now, parents can opt their child out of the EL program, but we are still required to offer them some sort of service so that we're able to see growth and then continually offer them readmittance back into the program. There are changes as far as how we monitor and evaluate student progress, how we evaluate our own program, and then also key changes with ensuring meaningful communication with parents. And that's something you'll see detailed a little bit more as we move through the presentation. So we looked at many different data sources. We talked to administration, faculty, staff. We held family focus groups from the pictures that you saw before. We also looked at all of our in-house data. How are our students doing on PSSAs, Keystone testing? Wida Access is the big test that we do every year solely for English language proficiency. And we looked at all that data and we came up with some findings. We decided that, as you saw with the trends, that there was increased EL enrollment. We have celebrated cultural and linguistic diversity more so than a lot of other districts, particularly because, as you saw before, our students represent 30-something countries and 30-something languages. That we need more consistent data. That was another key area. We learned that we have great student mobility. So students move in and out of the district, and that tends to be a challenge for us. As I spoke about before, ensuring meaningful communication with our parents, that's a key area of focus. And like I said, I'll talk about that a little bit more further in the presentation. Just as I mentioned before, we need to make sure that our students have equal access to all programming within the district. That includes, sporting and things of that nature. We looked at the needs of our professional staff. So we looked at all of the surveys that the teachers filled out and said, what are the areas that you need further training? How can we support you in what you're doing in the classroom? So we found areas for opportunities there as well. And greater representation of all of our diverse population that we'd like to see within the buildings. And so we wrote a plan to kind of target all of those audit findings and to make an exemplary program. That's what's in this presentation, what an exemplary stand-up program would look like. So then we are kind of a leader in the field for all the other surrounding districts. Oops, sorry. Oh, no, that was good. All right, so how do we establish this exemplary program? Well, we look at these areas. So we look at EL policy and procedure. What are the things that we need to put in place systematically to make sure that we're reaching these students? We look at programming and equity. Do these students really have access to the full curriculum? And if not, what can we do to ensure that? Again, as I mentioned, professional learning, the idea of student and family engagement, and also school climate, meaning what are the students feeling? Do they feel included? Do they feel comforted and welcome in the building? Okay, so we came up with some steps. What do we need to do to ensure policy and procedure, to make sure that these kids actually have access? What systematic changes need to happen? First things first is we need a master plan. So that's our very first step. We need to know where we're headed based on where we've been and what our goals are. We need to have a systematic system and process and in place so that when things arise, it's not a question as what we're going to do, but just a reference to a manual to decide this is how Radnor handles a certain situation. We purchased and implemented a program called Elevation. That is going to help us manage our data. There's more information about this in the overall report, so I'll just kind of go over it a little bit now. But it's going to kind of be a resource, a place that we're going to hold all of the data related to ELs, as well as parent contact and things of that nature. And we can begin to write plans that are going to guide teachers as they're instructing the students, showing areas of strength and weakness, and what exactly the focus for each of these children are. It's also going to help us manage our initiatives, this plan. And we're going to identify more specific personnel to kind of make sure that there's someone at the head of what we're doing and help us process as we're moving forward. And kind of continue to manage exactly what we're doing in all of our buildings so that we have a cohesive program and it's not broken into pieces. And then, again, as the state requires, do an annual ELD progress review. That is not necessarily as complete as the audit that you have in front of you now. That might just be a quick audit to look at data and findings, but just to find the strengths and weaknesses of the program so we can tighten as we move forward. Okay, so I'm not going to read this to you, but this is our implementation timeline. So what we did is we broke down into action steps and then spread that over a 5-year plan. So we took the things that we felt were most important, things that we felt really needed to be targeted right away, and we put those over years 1 and 2. Those are things like make that master plan, identifying specific personnel to be in charge of Title III responsibilities, redesigning the program, revising, enhancing registration processes, things of that nature. The really important things, especially in areas that have been affected most by ESSA, and as you can see, there's other things that we need to be doing continually, and then things that can wait a little bit, years 2, 3, 4, and so on. Things that we need to be doing continually, budgeting Title III money, making projections based on the program, and then conducting that annual review as well. There's areas of programming and equity. Currently, we do not have a dedicated newcomer program. So any newcomer, a student that comes to Radnor School District that does not speak in English at all, like a level 1 is that we refer to it within the program, we would need to develop some sort of program to welcome them into the community and get them acclimated to not just the language, but the culture of the district as soon as possible. We also have, making ESL program specialists. That's us, even though ESL seems, a lot of people think it's a very antiquated acronym, but for us, that's what our specialization is called, so it's still an ESL specialist. And content area teachers, and making sure that we're working to develop that partnership and that relationship further. We do need implementation support, so that's administrative and as well as building principals, as well as content area teachers, and making sure we have the support to enter a strong program. We're going to be looking at MTSS development, so multi-tiered systems of support. Looking at course alignment. Are we offering a cohesive program that the students have access to, or is it fragmented? Creating a resource inventory, making sure that there is enough resources available to our teachers so that they're able to instruct the students well. And again, this is our implementation timeline with all of the action steps detailed, from developing the newcomer program to developing further curriculum, performing a program review, also MTSS practices. That is key, especially as we look at greater special education enrollment and things of that nature. Forming a committee to evaluate courses. Are these courses available for the students? Are they tailored to student needs? And then looking also at curriculum materials, creating a process to determine equitable access, and creating a list of instructional resources and materials that are available. I also have a technology piece in here as far as researching and developing software or any other technology that might be available and helpful. And then also expanding the ELD specific trained personnel. So these are people that we can train specifically in second language acquisition and the acculturation process so that they're able to most effectively help these students as they're moving throughout our buildings. That's not just in the classroom, but are they able to find the classroom? Can they access the cafeteria? Do they know how to buy lunch? What do we need to do to support them in those areas? Okay, so another critical piece of this is professional learning. We must devote our resources to professional learning and making sure that our teachers have the self-efficacy that they need to believe that they can teach the students. That's half the battle. So offering professional learning for district leadership, administration, as well as the content area teachers, the program specialists. It's very important that we are all knowledgeable, again, of that language acquisition piece and that acculturalization piece. Gifted education, special education teachers, support service specialists, all of these people need to be brought onto the same page so that we're most able to effectively work with these students, and also district support staff. So do our school secretaries know that every parent has the right to a translator or an interpreter, and do they know how to contact the right people? Things of that nature. Again, this is our implementation timeline. So as far as what we can offer when and who we will offer it to. And this is the same. So what are we offering when, who are we offering it to, looking at those specialists as well, and the district support staff, as I mentioned. Okay, so EL family, student and family engagement. It is critical for the students and their progress that their families are engaged in the Radnor community. Not only is it critical for them, but it's also critical for the Radnor students, all of them. If we are truly going to meet that mission statement that I talked about earlier and celebrate cultural diversity and awareness, then this is kind of a good place to start, where we are kind of introducing the student body to our English learners, that community, that international community, and giving them that, maybe for some, might be the first taste of that. So where do we start? We provide effective language translation services, interpretation services to our multilingual families. We create outreach activities. We, as Teresa mentioned before, she has culture buddies, so kind of giving that bridge, building that bridge, and developing that. And then working to honor and reflect the diversity of our families, including language and cultures. Where do we see it in the building? Where do we see it as they're walking through the building? Are they welcomed when they come into the main office? Things of that nature. Here's our timeline. So are we providing effective language assistance to multilingual families? That is something that we need to do over the 5 years. We need to develop a system for that. Developing a process to ensure access to a translator or translated materials. That was one area that we need growth. So we put that right at year 1, and we're going to solve that first. Developing a procedure for determining parents' language home needs. This is not an issue, this particular one is not an issue that's only for English learners within our district. It's also for any in the international community anywhere. The parent might need things coming home to them in their first language, even though Johnny speaks perfect English at school. So it's really a bigger issue and identifying the parent's preferred home language, because that is their right. Continuing on, developing a systematic procedure. A lot of everything in this presentation is about developing a systematic procedure for something. So that is developing a procedure for translating documents. What do our teachers do when they have a field trip form? Do they know where they need to go or how they need to put that together? Making sure there's a process in place. Moving on, a procedure for meetings. Or student conferences. Do we have a procedure for that? What do our teachers need to do? And I can tell you at the middle school, I'm sure that they don't know all the time what they need to do within that to get a translator to come to the student conference or to have a translator on the phone or something like that. That's not overly well-known information, and that's where we need some help and some professional development support to make sure that they do know that information. So we need a systematic plan and a procedure in place. We also need one to make sure that our parents know that they have access to free language services. Also researching and developing tools for acquiring trained interpreters and translators. This one's a little bit bigger, but creating and conducting EL family outreach activities. So what are we doing to welcome them and invite them into the Radnor community? How are we connecting them to other international families or just other American families within the Radnor community? What kind of partnership? I've been working a lot this year with the PTO and trying to develop that relationship between our multicultural families and the multicultural committee on the PTO. What can we do to strengthen that bond and that relationship? How can we help the guidance departments in pairing new families, new EL families with other international families, or just a welcoming family to be a welcoming face and help them through the process? And then how can we build leadership opportunities for our EL families to keep them engaged and committed to the district and the initiatives that we have here? There's plenty of opportunities that they could be engaged in. And lastly, school climate. So this is kind of looking at our buildings. We did some building walkthroughs and looked at just our spaces. What do our spaces look like? Are they welcoming environments for these families? Do they know how to get through the building? Things like that. Do we demonstrate an appreciation for the students' artwork, related to their culture, their home language, or things of that nature? Do we promote a sense of belonging for our EL students? Can they feel connected to the culture here at Radnor? And then create a supporting learning environment for them. Oops, it stopped working.
I think I broke this one.
You can do it there. Oh, is it froze? Cool. Yep. So that goes, if you look on the next page of the presentation, you're going to see the potential implementation timeline there. So that timeline is talking about doing those building walkthroughs. Where can we improve? What are our areas that we can simply just put up a sign in another language that might help? Something like that. Can we provide staff and students opportunities to learn about our families, to create that connection? We can review the library resources. I was saying to someone earlier, I was really excited to hear from the library audit and just what type of materials that they might have available right here in the buildings that could be a resource for our families. What opportunities can we use, I guess, to limit barriers for EL participation in student groups? Are they aware of everything that's happening? And they may very well be aware, but how can we improve that process? And then creating opportunities for peer-to-peer collaboration. As I mentioned before with the professional development, this also includes an area of utilizing that trained personnel that I referred to before, those people that can be put in place to really support the students that we're talking about, the newcomer school culture and process education, and then creating opportunities for further content area support within the classroom. Okay, so that's what I have for you today. Do you have any questions?
Andrew, Sarah, do you want to briefly ask some questions? And then we have to, yeah.
Kind of quickly. Thank you very much for that. It's great. I love hearing about these topics because it's a specific research specialty of mine. I teach in the Education, Culture, and Society Division at Penn. I've taught Ed linguistics courses, so this is an area that's kind of near and dear to my heart. Very impressive presentation. Thank you very much. I have a number of things that I'd like to talk about, but I'd say that one thing that I would probably prioritize is item 2.2 on, I think it was slide 13. There's a lot of discussion and a lot of, let me just make slide 14 rather. There's a lot of discussion and research and debate about how to effectively achieve that. It's a really big issue. It's a difficult issue. Namely, how do you integrate knowledge between ESL and content area? And I think that is a really core challenge. And I like how you made a pretty strong case for having this position. I think that someone in this position would be extremely helpful for all of these goals that you have. One final thing just to say, because we're well on time here, but these communicational strategies where we as a district communicate very clearly that as a community we have an identity, we have certain values. As a district we have certain values, and one of those values is to be inclusive and pluralistic. And I think any way that we can communicate that is extremely valuable. And I don't know if anyone else noticed this or thought this, but I was kind of blown away by the amount of linguistic diversity in our community and among our student body. So I think even that is very important for all of us to know. Thanks.
All right. Sarah, do you have any questions, comments, quickly?
No, I texted Andrew that I would cede him my time.
Okay. Mr. Madden, anything you want to comment on?
Okay, well, I'd like to thank you all. I think it was a very well-done presentation, a lot of material. What I would like to see us begin to do is to incorporate almost like assistive technology devices that can be used when the parent comes in and they actually can sit down and speak into something and it comes out in English, okay? So we need to be able to have those things for conversation purposes, I think would be very valuable. And some of the other pieces that I would be excited about, because sometimes we over-identify students with language disability, not really disability, but with language issues, with specific learning disabilities.
Mm-hmm.
And they're over-identified into special education, and they're very, very intelligent, but they have issues communicating. So we need to make sure that if and I'm a proponent for using your own language until you learn our language along the way. As much as you can, you learn our language. Okay, but if we disregard the knowledge that they bring with them through their own language, I think I believe that it's a disservice to them in how they're learning, okay? So if we can make sure that we're doing that, such as the translated pages that would come up, I know we have some of that in on our website that we do have. If we have welcome, and I don't know whether we do this at our schools, but if we had welcome set like that, and you could put hello in many different languages. I know Conestoga High School has it right up on the wall for teachers to look at if you wanted to say hello to somebody in a particular language. Welcome, blah, blah, blah. So I think you're on the right track. One other piece, which is kind of a sidelight, there are some districts that are allowing retirees to come in and to work off some of their tax dollars, okay? So if we could reach out into the community and find people who are fluent in English and the native language and be able to bring them in, there would be, thinking of as a student who's in a different land than I grew up in, and I can go into a room and there can be somebody there who can talk to me.
Yes.
That would be fantastic. And that would not, we would have that through a volunteer program that we possibly could put together. I myself, I lived in Germany when I was 18 years old. I did not speak German whatsoever. And it was very traumatic. I worked in a German factory, and I could understand go get. I had no idea what they told me to get, and I was standing at a wall just picking different things up, and I heard Doomkopf and a couple other things, you know. I was not any less intelligent than I was in America, but everyone in the factory that I worked thought I was a Doomkopf. So I really think that we have to address this. Now, I guess what I'm concerned about is how they're opting out. Okay, so you're testing the students when they
Right.
come, and what does that give us?
So basically, when the student comes into the district, the first thing that we do is we give them something called the Wida screener. And that's for grades 1 through 12. There's something a little bit different for kindergarten, but for the sake of the conversation. So we test them, and then if they get a certain number, they qualify for the ESL program. So, or the ELD program. So then what we say to them is we're obligated by the state to let them know of their right to opt out of the program. So we give them a complete write-up as to these are your rights that you can opt out of the program. Here are the consequences related to that decision. And then they can send that back to us. Once we receive that, that's not where the ball stops because we kind of keep pursuing the family. So we'll call them on the phone, we invite them in, we sit down with our building administrator and the parent or and the interpreter if necessary or the translator, and we'll sit down and have that conversation. What does this really mean? A lot of times the concerns are more related to what type of class their child will be in. They feel that they're going to be segregated and separated from the rest of the student body. So we kind of alleviate those fears, give them exactly what our program details and entails, give them a sample of what their student's day might be like, and generally we can kind of alleviate that. Sometimes they have other concerns and they do opt out of the program. In that case, we kind of have to get very creative as how we offer services for those students.
Now, just suppose I come in and I'm in first grade and I'm tested and I go into this program. Then how do we know when I master English to the point where I no longer need these services and I graduate from this
Sure.
program?
So every year we also offer the Wida access testing. So that happens in February or March, depending. And that's a yearly annual proficiency test that we give those students. So it's very similar to the screener, but there are some, it's very, recently was kind of recalibrated to be more heavily based on the Common Core. So it could get very difficult. But the students take the test, and if they score high enough on that test, then the state says they're good. With that, though, we also now have to do, and this is a change with ESSA, we now have to do student rubrics. So we will sit down, we'll meet with the content area teachers, and they will score the students on rubrics that we give them based on all 4 domains of language, reading, writing, speaking, and listening. And then we also complete those. The Wida Access score, along with the rubric score the teachers create, along with our rubric score, gets added together. And if it reaches the magic number of 10.8, the state says they can be exited from the program. We also depend a lot on our own expertise. If the student's scoring very high on the test but hasn't quite gotten the number to exit, then we need to look at some other options too as to how we are putting the students in classes or what we're doing with that student to make sure their needs are being met.
So even if they do get that 10.8, you may determine that it would be in their best interest, even though
To
the state
remain.
qualifies them, but we would like to see them progress a little bit more. such
We can do that as well.
Maybe the writing piece and the language arts teacher said, they can speak very, very well, but we're having issues with the writing.
Right.
So we're tracking all that.
And with that said, once they exit the program, we monitor their progress actively for 2 years. We monitor them completely for 4, but actively monitoring for 2 years. At any point during those 2 years, if we feel that the student is struggling, we just bring them back into the program.
Okay. And how do you feel we're doing?
Overall,
Yeah.
I think that we have areas of growth that need to be accomplished. I think that ESSA has been a very good thing for our program because it's really highlighted our student population. It's made them very important for a number of reasons. And because of that, these improvements have now become necessary instead of just something that would be nice. Exactly.
Now,
So I think that that's been helpful.
This leads me into our previous discussion about counselors. So if I'm a counselor and I'm coming in and I'm trying to counsel somebody that has limited English abilities, what type of services are offered for that? Do we
For
have any?
counseling, on a student that's struggling, I wasn't in
No, I
the,
mean, the student comes in with something else. I'm not struggling with this is not an English language.
I mean, like emotionally.
Yeah,
like,
just say
sure.
I'm having an emotional problem and I come in and
Sure.
I can't talk to you because you're not understanding what I'm trying to say.
We've had that happen. Actually, this year I've dealt with that a number of times at the middle school. Middle school years can be tumultuous. So we've.
You guys are accessible to
Yes,
counselors when
so
needed.
we, and I think I can speak for all of us, and we're missing one tonight, but we all have an extraordinary relationship with our students. We see them often, they trust us, we contact their families, we really work hard to develop that relationship. With that said, we also utilize our guidance department if necessary. A couple of times this year, we've had to, where I've been in a room with a student, the guidance counselors come in and we've gotten the translator on the phone because we have the phone service that we use. So the translator was able to kind of go back and forth. And is it awkward sometimes? Yes. Is it perfect? No. But it's what we have available to us and it works overall.
All right, thank you.
All right.
So, yeah.
I'm off. I think this is going to be an area that we're going to continue to see more focus on, and so I'm delighted that you guys are ahead of the wave there, and I commend you for your work so far, and I see that there's more work to be done, and it's vitally important to us. Unfortunately, I have a whole bunch of questions too, but I'm going to move on. We still have our librarians to
Feel free to send me any questions
to
that you
hear
might
from.
have.
So, but we appreciate you coming. Thank you for
Thank you
bringing
very
all of
much.
this. It's a wealth of information here. And I'm sorry, Ace, I didn't get to
Thank you so much.
anything you want to
Thanks
say.
again.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. And now we're going to hear from our librarians.
So do we want to do a time check? So I think you're supposed to move into exec at 6:30.
We don't
thought-
want them to sit all day and then not hear them.
I know.
Yeah.
Librarians
I
are
know.
pretty rough people when you get them irritated.
Well, I would like to hear
Okay.
them still. Can we? Yeah. Well, and then
Okay.
could we do
ahead.
the exec after our meeting? Because our meeting is at 7.
What am I doing with that? Aren't you
Thank
clicking
you.
your presentation?
Because they waited so patiently.
We have the much coveted spot of being last.
Last but not least, right?
Sorry.
Thank you.
I'm going to step upstairs and let them know.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
I see one of you in this document. I see you in this document. Rock star.
Yes. So when you reference the presentation, if you can reference the one with the yellow cover sheet on it, there
Okay.
are just a couple little tweaks in there, not a lot, but that is the most recent copy. Correct. So for the folks on the phone, for Sarah and Andrew, there are a couple arrows pointing out items that are new, and we'll highlight them as we go through. I think that's probably the most notable difference. All right, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourselves and tell us which building you're from?
I'm Melissa McCloy. I'm from Ithan.
No, now you're off. Now you're on.
Okay. Amy Pashada from Radnor Elementary.
Now you're on.
Catherine Horan from Radnor Middle School.
Sue Bellstrom
Sue Dahlstrom, Wayne Elementary, and we want to shout out to Miss Shao Wetzel, who's in Australia on sabbatical, and her birthday's today, so happy birthday, Miss Shao. We passed out some documents to you. These are our new AASL, American Association of School Librarians standards. We didn't buy the whole book for you because this is why we're struggling with our new standards. We also gave you 2 publications that are based on research on the public school libraries in Pennsylvania. As Maureen mentioned, our curriculum review comes at a really great time because we're just at the onset of a new cycle of standards, both ISTE standards technology and also our American Association of School Libraries. We already said who we are. We're really thankful for you to let us present tonight because when Maureen told us she was retiring, we had a full-blown panic because she's been so wonderful and supportive of our program. So thank you for including us. These are from what school libraries are supposed to be from our new appendix, and we know that you've read everything, so we don't feel we need to read the slides to you, but we want to point out that study after study has shown that having access to a full-time school librarian produces better outcomes in all assessments. And right now, the librarians are working on House Bill 1355, which has 1 certified librarian per school. So librarians are very active at making sure that children have access to a school librarian. So we're going to be referring to some terms throughout our presentation. We wanted to make sure that you had our definition of terms. These 7 jobs that we do or standards come from our curriculum, our Pennsylvania School Librarians Model Curriculum. We think it's important to mention to you, and it's come up a couple of times tonight, about online resources. So all of our online resources that the district pays for are available to students 24/7. They have access to those. We also work to provide reading lists and host reading events in the larger Radnor community. So we wanted you to see some of the things that we're involved in as librarians. So we're all teaching full-time loads. You can go to the next slide, thank you. But we're also involved in our building level, we're involved in the district level, we're involved in the community, and many of us are also involved with a lot of work at the state level representing Radnor. So in our audit, we looked at educational research, we looked at our new standards. We're still in the process of doing our survey. There were just too many surveys that were being administered this spring, so we decided to wait until later. We did a lot of site visits to check out what our neighbors are doing, and we're also pretty proud of our partnership with the Radnor Memorial Library. So here's what's new for us. We have new standards I mentioned. The Pennsylvania School Librarians Association is very active at aligning our library curriculum with our state standards, and so now they're going to be incorporating the new AASL and the ISTE standards. They're beginning work on that this summer. Our digital citizenship curriculum was also updated. Part of it, about half of it, was produced throughout this year. The rest of it will be produced in the coming year. Many of our library common assessments are based on the Common Sense Education curriculum. So one of the things we have to do over the summer and as the new modules are released is we have to update and refine our assessments. We belong to the Pennsylvania eBook Consortium, so you probably remember a few years ago when we came and we talked about ebooks. We had some help from the Radnor Education Foundation, and now the state has a consortium. So we're evaluating how effective that is across all 3 levels of our schools.
Thanks, Sue. So as Sue mentioned, the research that we are referring to is a combination of studies that have been done over the past 20 years. So there was one study Dr. Lance did in 2000 and then repeated in 2012, and that produced the substantial evidence that an effective school library program helps Pennsylvania students specifically achieve academic success. So the data is that they used came from some of the PSSA scores for reading and writing. So you can see in that chart, I'm not going to read it to you, but you can see in the chart the presence of a full-time certified librarian does have a positive effect on all students. The second slide is a continuation, and you can see that although it does refer to writing scores from the PSSA, which is no longer done, I think it has an impact on what we see in students and preparing students for the 21st century. So although it's not a tested item, it's certainly something that we want our students to excel in. So you can see that. As Sue mentioned, the RTSD library curriculum, on the next slide, you can see where our standards come from. So this, you can see ELA, reading and writing in science and technical subjects, reading and writing in history and social studies and math, for a total of 138 standards. The next slide shows an infographic of all of the standards that apply from those 4 different areas and the ones that we consider librarians owning in our curriculum. So that's where our curriculum comes from in terms of PA standards, in addition to the National Association of School Librarians, AASL, and the ISTE standards, the technology standards. So we do have a combination of things. As Sue mentioned, the PA model curriculum encompasses all of those things, and what they do is they come up with the big ideas, and then they will go through and work on different lessons and different units and distribute those throughout the state. So you can see that it includes critical thinking, reading, writing, research, digital citizenship, and a wide variety of skills there, especially the bottom one, being responsible with your use of information and, being productive in a global society. One of the things that we chose to focus on in our site visits was makerspaces. So if you're not familiar with that, we just wanted to give you a definition of what a makerspace is. It's a term that you see all over the education literature these days. You see it in terms of STEM, critical thinking, problem solving, those kinds of things. So when we visited different schools, this came up time and time again, and it's almost as if every district does it a little differently. So we were looking at that to get some ideas. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So as you can see from the infographic that Sue created, we as librarians, we start with the individual student. Maybe we help them choose, a just right book for them. We help in our classes teach them digital citizenship skills. We reach out to families, sending home book lists, or along with our digital citizenship curriculum, our family tip sheets and things to discuss and some research. We work with teachers in our schools to collaborate on lessons. We work on things like National History Day. We do different programming like Read Across America. I know we presented in March about that. At the district level, we do participate in a lot of different committees. We try not to all sit on the same committees, but kind of spread things out so we can get a bigger, broader picture. At the region and state level, we try to be resources to other districts in the area. We also try to attend conferences at the national and state level. And then the larger world up there on the top, we really work with our students in a variety of ways to get them to be connected in a global sense. So a lot of those online databases, that 24/7 access, teaching them how to interact online and kind of make further connections outside their own school community. So as we audited our program, we came up with some areas of strength, and some of them we've already mentioned. You can see that we were the only district in Pennsylvania with librarians in all 3 of the PSLA leadership academies. We partnership with Radnor Memorial Library often. When the public library was closed, we brought, students in over the summer in various locations to make sure that they weren't losing out on those resources. And we do a lot of things throughout the year with the public library and librarians coming in to work with our students with us. Okay, so back to makerspaces. There were a couple key questions to consider when looking at makerspaces, and we found that the districts who have implemented them went through this process as well. And there are a couple different models, and we've listed them there. So we're looking at right now which makes the most sense for Radnor. We're starting at the elementary level, and then we'll expand into middle school and high school. So our recommendations, there are 10 recommendations up there that you can see. I don't think those were changed from the original ones. And the third one there, maintain appropriate funding and staffing. 4 years ago, in 2015, we did a presentation to the board to obtain additional funding in our book budgets, because compared to the state level, or the state recommendations, excuse me, we fell pretty far below the minimum. So we did a presentation and the board agreed over 5 years to bring us up to the exemplary level. So we just wanted to give an update so that you can see in that 2019 column where we are this year. We don't have numbers for next year. So at the elementary level, we haven't quite reached minimum, and we're about halfway to exemplary. Middle school is a little bit closer to minimum and exemplary, and then the high school at 28 is very close to the minimum, but not quite at exemplary yet. And you can see there's a little note on the bottom, the recommendations for the state, the PDE guidelines for school libraries, are being revised, and we're hoping that they will be available this summer, so we can compare and see if there's been any updates there. So that was the quick and dirty version. Does anybody have any questions?
Okay, so Andrew and Sarah, are you still there? I thought they.
Yes, I got dropped, but I'm back.
Okay, you got dropped. Do you have any questions about this library presentation, Sarah?
I don't have any questions at this time.
Andrew, anything?
I think I'm good for now. Thank you.
Okay, Asa, anything come to mind? Chuck?
Well, I'd like to thank you for the presentation. I also think that librarians help the communication. I've visited some libraries, mostly Wayne. No, nothing against any of the other ones, but I do visit Wayne, and I do see you talking with the students, and the students interacting, and very impressed. And because that's part of the process that we have to make sure that we're instilling in them. Not only do they need to be good digital citizens, but they need to be actually good citizens towards each other when they're actually like face-to-face talking with each other. And I will visit the other ones, but I do know that you do a fantastic job with them. And I'm glad to hear how we're related to the curriculum and how much support that Maureen has given you guys in the past, because that's really what we're here for. So thank you very much for all that.
So I have a question about the funding. So by what time were we committed to being at least at standard, if not exemplary?
It was a 5-year plan.
So that would be
4
next
years.
year? Or this year
The
5?
first column is 24-15.
So this is year 5, so we didn't do it. Okay.
And you were the one, Lydia, that said, we can't be minimum, we have to be exemplary. So we're moving in the right direction, and we appreciate the board's support, but we did feel that we needed to let you know where we stood.
Yeah. I am so glad you brought this back up, because I did not realize that we were still behind. It just puzzles me, so.
Yeah, I do know that for next year, we followed the allocation for next year. I think last year, it wasn't, we weren't fully allocated at the target that we had hoped for last year. But I know for the budget that you'll be approving tonight, that it is the allocation that we had on the chart that original night of the presentation.
But do we need to make up for past years where we didn't allocate enough?
Well, I think we feel at this point we're moving ahead as quickly as we can. I mean, as you can imagine, as we spoke about before, at the elementary level, like $15, you can hardly buy a library-bound book anymore. So you're buying like one book per student per year. The other changes we've made, since those early times was to pull some of the larger funds, the larger expenses away from the building. So we're paying for a lot of the databases at the district level now. So while we haven't added specifically to the book budget, we've taken some of those expenses away from the building.
And that's not incorporated in this amount?
No. When the other thing we did is each time we have a curricular revision, the year following the purchase of the curricular materials, we're making an attempt to put extra money in the budget that following year for the library. Because if elementary teachers get a new social studies program, they start coming down to the library and saying, I need 500 books on George Washington. It's like, well, I didn't know. So we like to let them walk through those programs for at least the first year, and then the second year to provide some additional funding through the curriculum office so that we can personalize the library to align with the curriculum.
So what would an aggregate amount be that we could put in the budget to make this complete? Because I see.
Possibly, what I think maybe we should do is extend it out beyond 5 years.
Oh,
Like,
that's an idea.
make another, 3 or 4 year plan or whatever, because the new guidelines are gonna be released this summer anyway. And if we're going to adjust it, I think it would be a good idea to adjust it with the new, according to the new guidelines.
And what we can do is we can put together a plan that looks like that, and then we can take the enrollment for each of the buildings and calculate out, what the total cost would be. Because, if you're looking at it here, you're talking $10 a student, but then it's $10 a student, times however many students we have. So it would give you a better idea of what that would look like on an annual basis.
Because I'm interested in fixing this, so I see Mr. Bechtold is sitting back there too. We've been underfunding our library. We had a plan for 5 years. We wanted to be exemplary. We're not there. You can see.
Well,
So
we're not even at minimum.
we're not even minimum. And that's just,
So
I don't
what
know
can-
how
what-
this fell through the cracks
Yeah,
so
but-
badly. I can only imagine.
No, I agree with you. I guess my point would be,
Just
since we are
administrative
having
changes, but-
well, I don't care. We are having some kind of a budget meeting shortly, fairly soon. So,
Well, we
I-
ha-
to
Give
your,
us a dollar amount.
yeah, to your point,
Give us
to
a
your
dollar
point,
amount for our budget
we can
meeting.
always, if we know what we're trying to get to, we can just say, for instance, we want to get to the minimum, we'll just say. So whatever that would be, if we
Well,
know
I-
what it is, we could basically put it in, and if you get 5 people that say that's a grand
Well,
idea,
I think my
can it be
recommendation
done?
for tonight would be to approve and to point out to everyone that we're approving the allocation that we committed to for this year, and as Sue mentioned, make a commitment to, following through on that for the next 5 years. We have the full allocation for this year in the budget already for each of the buildings.
But that doesn't bring us up to
It
what our
doesn't.
target was.
It doesn't.
So what was the target supposed to be for 2019, 2020?
Well, the target was supposed to be $25 for elementary and 28 for middle and 31 for high school.
Our target was minimum, rather than,
I'm sorry, I stepped
Right,
out.
but we're
Who
s-
set the target and what target we're
Oh.
referring to?
We did a presentation 5
5 years ago.
years ago, and we had several, we had several different proposals, and we basically came with a 5-year plan that said this is what we'd need to increase every year. So like elementary, the first year was $5, and then $4, and $3, and $2, and $1. And the high school, we flipped it because they were closer to the objective. So they were gonna get $1, $2, $3, $4, $5 to bring us up. We stalled for a couple of years. The first year we got money, we stalled for a couple of years. We're moving in the right direction again. So when we made our presentation, we asked to be brought to the state minimum, and this committee said that's not good enough for Radnor.
But we're not even anywhere near that.
we said
so-
that 5 years ago.
That's
wasn't
what you
good
said
enough.
5 years ago.
It's still not good.
Right.
It's actually possibly gone backwards if the standards have been raised,
Yeah,
which we don't know.
I tried to
which we will
twist some
know.
arms of my friends in Harrisburg, and they
Let you
said,
know
I'm
ahead of
sorry,
time."
Sue, we can't release those until they have a couple more steps to go through.
But like I said, we have the full allocation in the budget for this year. In fact, this slide from our presentation 5 years ago is even right in the budget book, so that it doesn't get missed, in the transition and whatnot. So the full allocation for all 3 levels is definitely in there for this year.
But it's not up to the minimum.
It's not up to the
Which is what
minimum.
we had somewhat pledged 5 years ago. Did we make a commitment? See, unfortunately,
Well,
I don't know where I was, but this is, not that it's somewhat new to me. I didn't realize that we had said that, and I didn't realize that we haven't been funding it the way,
I didn't
the
either.
way
I
that
thought
we
that-
thought we would. So I would like to see us, I'd like to see us tonight. I don't have a problem.
So, look, just back to this, what do we need to
How
put
do-
in to get this where we're going to be for?
Honestly, I would want to understand it more. I mean, if you have a budget that we've been preparing all year, and you're saying that the budget from the curriculum department, you feel that it has been the right dollars, to all of a sudden now, because we set something in 2015 and minimum standard exemplar, I mean, I just want to understand it more, just to understand why we're all of a sudden making an adjustment. I mean,
I
this
think
is
it's
something I
because we
don't.
were not aware of it,
I
is really
think we
what
didn't
it is.
realize that we
So, but if we're- so-
That's
so-
the real issue
so-
here.
So then,
I don't like to make commitments and then find out that they haven't been lived up to. I would take that personal, that was a commitment that we made.
so then
But we-
may I,
and-
so
and
so I
we didn't do it.
suggest, so I suggest that we have opportunities
I will
to look
give
at
you-
moving dollars in the budget,
right.
and we could look to move dollars in the budget if this is what we're saying is a
Yes.
priority.
Well,
And this is
that's
the
just-
priority where we want to move
That's
dollars.
just right now, the
but-
two of us saying that. So, yeah,
Right.
I would agree
But
to.
an 11th hour addition, I
I would
would
agree
have
to being
concerns.
able to move it around, look at it, find out what it is.
All right,
to-
well,
And move it around
I
later
will
to
take a
put it
look at the
in.
numbers. I'll pull out what I have in there for 2020, and then I will give you a report on where we are and what I think we can do within the current budget.
And Andrew and Sarah, are you still there?
Yes.
Are you listening to this? That we're woefully underfunded in our library section as we were
Well,
5 years
Lydia,
ago?
I'm gonna be honest with you, I wasn't on the board 5 years ago, so I don't know what the committee committed to versus the whole board. And I'm feeling a little like, how come we're suddenly hearing this now? Why wasn't this ever brought up in budget discussions? If the board committed to something,
Right.
why wasn't it in the budget? But I don't feel like at this late date, it's time to renegotiate the whole budget over making it whole for the past 5 years.
Yeah, and it wasn't a board resolution or anything like that. It was a discussion in the committee. We put it in the budget, and, some years it made it through and some years it didn't. So, this year it is definitely in the budget. So I will go back and I will look and see where we can reallocate some funds. And I will talk with the librarians at the 3 different levels to see where it's the most necessary.
Okay.
All right?
And then we can always revisit this and move some funding around if necessary after we pass the budget.
Yes,
Correct?
we can do that in the
We can do
curriculum
that.
department.
Yeah.
Could I just make one more? I just want to say that we all are just thankful that every school has a full-time librarian. And we put it in a slide but didn't mention it. We're really thankful for the support of our clerks as well. Because you've been in our libraries and you see that while we're teaching, there's a whole nother arena of things going on, which is made possible by our paraprofessionals. And we have a whole room, a library of books that circulate to support the independent reading and social studies, science, and so we're thankful for what we have. We want to be sure that you know that.
We're thankful for you. You also have a lot of volunteers?
We do.
You
A
still
lot of
get your
people are in
volunteers.
our buildings every day.
Thank you very much, and thank you for waiting and going at the final hour.
And we're very appreciative of you, the fact that you're so active and so informed. I mean, it just makes Radnor look great, and so we all benefit.
Thank you very much.
Love you guys.
Good pictures, too.
All right, do we
Sarah,
have,
I'm sorry I dropped off. My phone keeps cutting out, I guess. Can I just say that I'd like it if we could in the future be told when there's commitments that are made that then we're not putting into the budget?
I agree, Sarah.
yep, it should be more codified.
And Lydia,
And let's also make sure we completely understand what those commitments were. Having not been here 5 years ago, often, I just want to make sure we understand exactly what they are. There's 9 individual board members, and often we will say we're committed to this or we're in agreement to do that, but without the history of a board resolution, I think we got to make sure we just are all talk about. I just feel like we're all jumping to, I just want to make sure we're being thoughtful and understanding all of this.
All right. Are we through our agenda? Okay. So that brings us to new business. Sarah, do you want to do it in this meeting or the next one?
well, I'd rather do it here.
Okay.
Because I think we need to bring it to the full board
Okay,
next week.
okay.
And basically the concept, I'm not gonna waste everybody's time reading it out loud, because I think you have copies of it there, but the concept is that the Pennsylvania School Board Association districts are allowed to make proposals for language that should be in the PSBA's legislative approach. And one of the districts last year asked the body to consider asking the state to provide funding for mental health services, which would include things like counselors we were talking about today, not just for general health of our students, but also for safety in schools and overall wellness of district populations. and it didn't initially get onto the agenda last year, so Andrew Babson and I were there, and we offered to, if they were going to re-propose it this year, bring it to the Radnor School Board. It's helpful when multiple districts propose a concept, even if we don't all have exactly the same language. It's more likely to then be brought to the general body for consideration. So I sent language. I think people may want to consider changes or suggestions to it, but I think we should ask the full board. Obviously, we would need their approval to propose it to PSBA for the legislative approach. And obviously, typically, we would have put something like this through the GRCC, but since they weren't meeting this month, and since the other school districts didn't have language they were really ready to propose, I couldn't bring it last month, so curriculum made the most sense.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. So I think Chuck and I both support this, and I know Andrew does. So we will put this forth to the full board for the business meeting as a suggestion that we would support. So thank you guys for bringing this. Yeah.
Thank you, Sarah.
Okay. And that concludes our meeting. We don't have time for public comment.
Well, do we have?
Did you have comment?
Yes.
I did. All right. Okay.
If you don't have time, I'll send you in.
Sorry.
No,
We have a few moments for you, Laura. Okay.
We have 4 minutes because we have another board meeting after.
Yeah, we have a meeting at 7, but yeah.
Two things. One, I'm only here because streaming isn't working. Otherwise, I would be home watching this on my TV. Is it working now?
We fixed it since
As soon as I got on camera, it began
Be
to
having
work.
dinner.
I could be. Well, two things. One, listen, when I hear all these people say all these wonderful things, it just makes me glow with pride about Radnor. And then I get to page 20 of the packet. And I know that no one meant to make it sound like it was just a footnote, but the 22% when it comes to African Americans going further in their education, it can't be a footnote. I wish you guys would schedule an entire curriculum meeting about why our African American residents here are, for whatever reasons, not continuing or completing their education. It's too important. And when I sat and listened to the ELL presentation, I almost wished we could have the same presentation for African American students, how we can understand them better, the language better, and all of these incredible things that I heard you guys talk about going in for our ELL kids. I really wish we could do it for our minority students, because I'm not saying the school's failing them. It's not just us, it's parents, it's themselves, it's the community, it's the government. But the reality is that number has to come up. And true that it may not be the ones that want to, but I am interested in knowing those that tried and weren't able to, or those that even tried to become a freshman. And I do think that, I have this crazy idea. Why don't you talk to them, the students we have here? Why couldn't we have a focus group or a caucus group and find out just what it is that they're feeling? Because certainly no one in this room knows what that is. So I'm just really, I just wanted to reinforce that this one really hit me in the gut when I saw it. I knew it, but I saw it, and I would encourage you to devote as many focus groups as you could, and even full committee meetings, to finding out just why this is happening. That's it. Thanks very much.
All right, thank you very much. You should state your name. I don't know if you
Laura
did.
Foreign, almost non-graduate of Radnor High School, and a college dropout. Thank you.
God bless.
All right, and we have a,
We also have an emailed public comment from Roberta Winters, pardon me. As the Wellness Committee shares its findings, I would like to encourage the district to focus on the health and wellness of our elementary and middle school students relative to the importance of recess. As students will begin new start and dismissal times in our schools, the inclusion of adequate recess is essential. Although I have not done extensive research on the topic, my years for teacher and experience as a parent would affirm much of what is stated in this article, Why Kids Need Recess. I'm sure there's a link to that article. I'm sure there are many other points of view on this issue that are worthy of your ongoing consideration. Thank you.
okay, thank you very much. I believe we are adjourned.